Hey friends, my name is Jackson. I'm not your average NB, and welcome back to my channel. I'm not going to be able to finish the entire book this weekend, but I'm going to try and do as many chapters as possible. So there'll probably be like 8 or 9. I'm not going to make any promises as to how many chapters there are going to be. I'm going to aim for 9. So 9 today, and then 9 Saturday, and then, oh no, 3 today, and then 3 Saturday, and then 3 Sunday, which will equal 9. So again, I'm not making any promises. There could be less, but I'm gonna hopefully record at least 3 chapters today. So let's get going. I'm really excited about this. Mistakes of the Past, Volume 2, 18 years ago. Oh, this is chapter 108, by the way. 18 years ago, current time. I never thought it would be like this. This had been needlessly boring. It was nothing like how he'd imagined it being. There was no thrill to this vengeance. It was bland and dissatisfying, hollow in comparison to his losses. Marshall Moshe Rabideau had single-handedly started the largest investigation Lich King Records had ever seen by the authorities. This caused stocks to plummet. In days they were in the red, then bankrupt. He'd had to change his name and officially put down the company. Moshe had utterly ruined him. There was an evisceration. Had he not been tipped off by his informant in the police department, he'd have lost everything. The FBI had ridden them for months, not to mention the international authorities. They naturally found no connection between those overseas, and those at the warehouse. Middlemen did have their purpose after all. But this didn't feel like enough. He'd had him shot, sure, but that wasn't enough. This was personal. He should have been the one to pull the trigger. Frankly, he hadn't thought of using the child. The sound of the boy's crying faded as the car drove further away. Suddenly an idea came to mind. Maybe it wasn't too late to get the kind of vengeance he wanted. Marshall could die, or he could die knowing he'd failed in keeping his child safe from him. Turn the car around. I want his son. Oh boy. Okay, 8 months until current time. I hope you guys are able to keep up with this because frankly, I'm finding all this current time and 18 years ago stuff kind of confusing. So, anyway, Marsha and Billy had been walking for what felt like hours. The city was dying down and the occasional car drove by them. They watched warily as the brake lights lit up, fading into the distance. You never truly appreciate a car until you don't have one. How far from the club are we, do you think? Billy asked. He'd sounded as exhausted as Marshall felt, and that was saying something. Closing his eyes as they walked, he tried to figure it out in his head. Probably another 3 miles, give or take. Maybe. I don't know, dude. I'm not really a great judge of distance, Marshall said with a shrug. So it'll be a no if I ask you if you know how far we've walked? Billy asked tiredly. It was close to 3 a.m. All I know is we've walked for the last hour or so at least. Patting down his pockets, Marshall found a lighter. Grabbing the pack from his back pocket, he paused, staring at it. It was the pack of Parisian cigarettes Neptune had given him earlier in the night. Sudden thought of Nick made his heart ache. He would have known how far they'd gone and how far they had to go. He was a human atlas. They'd never see him again. Marshall had been willing his eyes to stop burning when Billy's continuing string of swearing caught his attention. Turning, he watched Billy wipe his face, quickly turning from him. Looking away, Marshall continued on, Billy trailing behind. What's on your mind? Marshall asked, knowing what the answer would be. We left Nick. He died because we left. We did, and he did. That's going to haunt me until the day I die, he said, the ground blowing. Wiping his eyes, Marshall continued on, listening as Billy followed silently, just steps behind him. There was nothing he could do now, and no way to change it. That chance was gone. They'd walked for another hour when Billy, grabbing his arm, caught Marshall's attention. Looking in the direction he'd pointed, he'd spotted the club less than a block away. You have your keys? Marshall asked. Yeah, I'll grab my bike, hit the ATM, lay low for a bit, empty my account, and bounce. Good, stay safe and be careful. I will. I'll see you before I leave, he said. Marshall watched as he crept to his bike, mixing in with the group leaving the club. It took moments and he was off down the street. Taking a breath, Marshall made his way towards his car, mixing in with a larger group that walked from the club. He was in his car in a blink, and driving before he even realized it. He wanted to go home, but he didn't want to bring this to his family. Marshall also knew that the moment he got home to end this night, he would cement everything into reality. Honestly, he wasn't sure if he was ready for that. He drove, taking the long way home. Marshall was lost in his thoughts. All he could think about were Dan and Nick. What was going to happen to them? Had they taken him off the ground yet? What was the media going to turn them into, heroes or villains? Had anyone called their families yet, or was it still too soon? What was he going to tell his family? What was he going to tell Hannah when she asked about work, or the band, or the guys? What was he going to tell his son? The sound of tapping glass next to him startled Marshall from his thoughts. Looking over, he spotted a worried-looking Hannah standing there in her pajamas. He was home. He had already parked in the driveway and didn't realize it. He couldn't tell them this. He couldn't do this to her. He would wait and see. He would see what happened before making his decision. Marshall, are you okay? You've been out here for a little while. Her voice was a soft caress to his weary soul. It was his most beloved treasure, and in this moment, his greatest undoing. His shoulders sagged, and the moment his forehead touched the steering wheel where his hands rested, Hannah opened the door. Love, what's wrong? Her hand rested on his. He could feel the trickle of her fingers as they trailed through his hair and down the back of his neck. Had a really rough night, Hannah, he said, feeling an ache in his soul. It's work-related stuff I can't talk about. It felt so good, the gentle touch of her hands. Come inside. We'll go to bed and everything will be better in the morning, she said softly. That would be so nice if it were true. Slowly, he pushed himself from the car, Hannah's hand resting on his arm a gentle support. He desperately needed a shower, but what he wanted more was to be held in the comfort of Hannah's arms. Grabbing a towel, he walked to the bathroom. His shower was long and hot. Marshall passed through the living room on his way up the stairs. It was nearly 5 a.m. He imagined that by now Hannah would be asleep on her side of the bed. She wasn't, though. He could see her from where he stood, checking on Marshy. He looked so peaceful, sleeping safe in his bed. It was strange how his whole world felt as if it were crumbling beneath him, and yet everything he knew appeared so normal. Even the sun was still coming up. When he entered the bedroom, Hannah was sitting up waiting for him. The moment he got into bed, she reached for him, cradling his head against her chest. As they settled into their embrace, he could hear her heartbeat and feel the gentle thumping beneath his cheek. His arm slipped beneath her, and holding Hannah close, he took a shaking breath. I know you can't tell me what's going on, but I'm here for you, she said softly. I can see you're hurting. I'm never gonna forget tonight, Han, Marshall murmured, closing his burning eyes. Hannah could feel the tremble in his shoulders, that familiar shaking. It brought her back to when his parents passed away. Marshall took another shaking breath, burying his face into her chest. She could feel the heat of his tears burning through her pajamas. It's okay, just let it out. Let it all out, she whispered as he held her tighter. It had taken 3 days for the news to break. The investigation of and subsequent bankruptcy of Lich King Records had dissolved the contracts of all its artists. Marshall had been in a depression the likes of which Hannah had never seen from him. Billy had stopped by the morning after. His visit was brief, and before she'd realized it, he left. No cold shoulder, no sharp jabs, nothing. It worried her. He too looked as strained as Marshall had been. The days passed as more news leaked. Hannah didn't know what to think. She just knew that she needed to be here for her husband. Two of his very best friends had been killed, and the news floored her. She couldn't imagine Dan and Nick being gone. They'd become such a staple in their lives. When the guys were home, they were always around. Hanging out with Marshall, having a jam session, playing with their son, and teaching him music. Nick smoking on the deck in the back, and Dan always asking if he could help clean up after dinner. That first weekend after, Hannah watched as Marshall Lee piled his newest toys near the front door. Marshy, sweetie, what are you doing? She asked, watching as he smiled at her excitedly. It's Saturday. Uncle Nicky always wants to see my new toys when he comes over on Saturdays, he said, now holding up his plastic Tyrannosaurus Rex. Do you think you'll like this one? Immediately, Hannah felt her heart break as he placed the dinosaur in her hands. She'd wanted to wait until Marshall was ready to have this conversation with their son. Hannah knew now, though, that ready or not, it was time. Uncle Nicky would have loved your dinosaur, Marshy, Hannah said, blinking back her tears. Now she sat on the floor. Baby, I need to talk to you about something important, and it's going to make you very sad. Do you remember last year when we talked about heaven, when Grammy and Pop Pop died and went to heaven? Hannah asked gently. She watched her son's eyebrows pinch together. Slowly he nodded. Marshy, Uncle Dan and Uncle Nicky went to heaven. He watched his little face crumple. But why? They're not Pop Pop people yet. They're Daddy people, and Daddy people don't die, he said, melting down. Hannah gently pulled him to her, cradling him in her arms. It had taken a moment of processing, but she understood her son's words. You're right, Marshy. They weren't old like Grammy and Pop Pop. They were young like Mommy and Daddy, she said, rocking him back and forth. Death isn't just for old people, Marshy, Hannah said, wiping his tears. Everyone can die. Babies, children, teenagers, adults, and the elderly. We don't like to talk about it because it makes us sad, but it's important to know. You can die when you get very sick, or get hurt badly, or grow old. In a perfect world, everyone would get to grow old. Unfortunately, the world we live in isn't perfect, and sometimes we lose people we love so very much. Hannah's fingers ran through her son's hair. Why did they die? He asked, looking up at her watery eyed. Your uncles were very brave. They died to save a woman's life and to stop the bad guys from doing the bad things they were doing. They got hurt, and because they got hurt as badly as they did, they died," she said softly, wondering if maybe she'd said too much. Marshall sat silently in her arms. "Mama? Yes, baby? Did Uncle Billy go to heaven too?" "No, your Uncle Billy is alive. Uncle Nicky and Uncle Dan were Uncle Billy and Daddy's best friends. When you lose people you love, you grieve. People grieve differently. Some people, like your Uncle Billy, need time and space away from other people. Some people, like Daddy, prefer to stay in bed and want to be around their family. Everyone grieves in their own way." "Is that why Daddy's been so sad?" "Yes, Marcy, it is why Daddy's been so sad," Hannah murmured, running her fingers through his hair. "I want Daddy." "We can go see him," Hannah said, holding her son as she stood. Marshall's cheek rested on her shoulder as she walked through the house and up the stairs. The bedroom door was open from her last check on him, and entering the room, Hannah found that he turned towards them. Hannah lowered him to the ground, taking a step back, watching as he rested his chin on the mattress. Marshall reached out, resting his hand on his son's head. "I'm sorry you're sad, Daddy. I'm sad too," he said, dissolving into tears. He'd barely let out a sob before his father reached for him. He took the heartbroken child into his arms, allowing him to cry into his chest. I know you're sad, kiddo, and that's okay. We can be sad together," Marshall said softly. "I miss them, Daddy. I miss Uncle Dan and Uncle Nicky." "I know, I miss them too." Ugh. Their funerals had been days apart, and both had been closed casket. While Hannah and Marshall Lee had stayed for just a few hours at each, and had come the day after for the burial, Marshall had stayed for the duration of both. Hannah was genuinely surprised to see that for both Billy was nowhere to be seen. More than anything, she and Marshall were stunned by what had happened after. The band's lawyer reached out to Marshall during Nick's funeral. Both Dan and Nick had left a portion of their money to Marshall Lee in their wills. This was something Marshall had been unaware of, and it moved him to tears. Hannah asked if it had just been Nick and Dan that did this, and it hadn't. Billy had done it too. The will read, "Upon my death, should I have no spouse or children of my own, 30% of my monetary assets are to go into a savings account for one Marshall Lee Abadir and any siblings. The account shall remain in the care of his parents until he is of age." Aw. Hannah felt a combination of appreciation and fear. Learning that the guys had put aside money for her son, especially with his condition, warmed her heart immensely. They wanted him to live an easier life, and she'd never been able to repay that kindness. But she was terrified. Her son had gained an overnight net worth of almost $1 million. It took Marshall days to get out of bed, weeks to willingly interact with anyone outside of she and their son, and the funeral, and more than a month to reach out to someone. That someone turned out to be Hudson Aberdeen. Hudson had reached out to Marshall after the news about Lich King Records and offered to sign him as a solo artist. Marshall told him he needed time, and after hearing of the bandmates' deaths, Hudson understood. Marshall had been waiting weeks for some kind of retribution from Anderson. There hadn't been any, and he dared to hope. He hoped that Anderson would leave them be. He had no proof he was even there that night. A month after Dan's funeral, he called Aberdeen to accept. Marshall worked as they needed him and had done so for the past 3 months. It was a simple, quiet life. As the months passed, it became one he had come to enjoy, at least until their dog had gone missing. 6 months until current time. Marshall leaned on the rail, blowing a trail of smoke from between his lips before flicking the cigarette off the roof, watching the small red light fade into the darkness. Parisian cigarettes would never be the same. Smoking was a habit he'd immediately trashed when Hannah had moved in after the wedding. He only smoked now when he was stressed or nervous, and he was definitely both at the moment. They'd celebrated Marshall Lee's 5th birthday last month. It was also the same day he'd gotten a package in the mail with the mutilated remains of their dog who'd run away 2 weeks prior to that. Marshall knew what a threat was when he saw one. He was a nice guy and tried doing good in a sometimes shitty world, but he could recognize a threat to his family from a mile away. The sound of an opening door caught his attention. Turning, he leaned against the rail on the roof, facing the cause of all his problems. "Marshall, what a surprise. I didn't think you'd show up after I contacted you." "What do you want, Anderson?" he asked, staring at the older man. His hair was threaded with silver, and he was dressed in his usual attire of a dark, well-pressed suit. "I came to see if you would reconsider my offer of reinstating your contract. I trust you got the package," he said with a smile. "It's the only reason I showed. Was it really necessary to kill the dog?" I felt my point wasn't making enough of an impact to gain your attention, he said, watching as Marshall glared, letting out a breath. I'm not coming back. I'm sticking with Nightosphere. Even at the price of your life, the lives of your son and wife, do they really mean so little to you, Marshall? My family means the world to me, and keeping them away from you is just what they need. The answer's no, Marshall said, walking past Anderson, pulling open the door leading from the roof. If you leave now, I will not hesitate in sending somebody to ending your waste of a life. He growled, turning to Marshall, who froze. See, that's the thing you don't understand, he said, pulling the See, that's the thing you don't understand, he said, pulling the pack of cigarettes from his pocket. Lighting one, he took a drag. He blew them. I don't at this point, Susan. I've done more than I have ever intended to do with my life. You don't scare me, Anderson. Neither do those men you have waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. He said, pointing down the stairwell with the lit cigarette. Marshall took another drag, blowing the smoke in the direction of the man he was addressing. I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not afraid to tell you to go screw yourself either, he said, flicking the ash before turning and heading down the flight of stairs. Finally, he reached the bottom where the four men stood. Marshall stared at them, the cigarette lazily hanging from his lips. He was itching for a fight now. You all gonna do something, or are you just gonna stand there trying to look tough? He asked, taking a drag and watching as one of the men lunged for him, but was caught by another of the group. Flick said not to touch him, he growled, holding the smaller man back as Marshall laughed. Come on, let him go, he said with the smoke, now staring at them. The one who'd lunged at him in particular. No, Lich's orders, the bigger one said, still holding the smaller one back. Whatever. Turning, he walked down the hallway, taking the stairs all the way to the bottom of the 40-story building. He wanted to throttle something. Surely he did, but those stairs had definitely done in easing his frustrations a bit. He'd found his car easily, and on the way home, he couldn't help but wonder just what kind of chain reaction he'd set off. He'd only come after he'd gotten the package. Anderson very obviously was not done with him yet. The drive was fast and quiet. The drive was fast and quiet, and honestly, he was in a bad mood again. Ever since that night, his mood swung in all directions. It wasn't even Hannah's fault, but sometimes he would come home and end up fighting with her over something stupid. Then he'd feel like an ass. Hannah would be angry and storm off crying, and little Marsh wouldn't have a clue about what was happening. The worst part was that this was becoming the new normal, and he couldn't have that. Pulling off the highway and exit early, Marshall drove to a florist that was luckily still open. Walking in, he asked for a dozen roses. Doot, doot. Tonight was different when he'd arrived home. Hannah was in the kitchen, very quiet, and there was no sign of Marshall Lee. Where's Kiddo? He asked, looking around. Usually he was being mauled by their son by now. I drove him up to my parents' place. Hannah, are you okay? He asked softly, placing the roses on the table in the dining room. He entered the kitchen, watching Hannah cook. I've been thinking a lot lately, Marshall. We've been fighting a lot. And you've been coming home upset and leaving upset. Last weekend you left after an argument on Friday and didn't come back until Sunday morning, he said, quietly stirring the pot on the stove. I know, I'm sorry. Now she turned to face him, looking completely hurt and trying desperately not to cry. Is there is there somebody else, Marshall? Is this not working? Because I'm trying really hard to. Hearing her say those words and sounding so hurt was like a hit to the stomach. Immediately he reached for her, pulling Hannah close to him as he held her tightly. No, never. There would never be anyone else for me other than you, Hannah, he said, tilting her head up as he kissed her. I love you. I love you so much that it hurts, and I would never leave you, Hannah. I would die first, he murmured against her lips before kissing her again. I'm sorry, but I had to ask. I had to be sure, Hannah said in a watery voice as she wiped her face dry. No, I'm sorry. I've been stressed and frustrated, and I've taken it out on you time and time again. I shouldn't have ever done that. None of this is your fault. I'm so sorry I hurt you, Hannah. I'm sorry, he said, squeezing her in his arms. It's okay. We're okay, and that's all that matters, she said softly, still holding on to her husband. Hold on a sec. I got you something, Marshall said, releasing the woman before him. He walked to the dining room, returning with the roses, watching as Hannah gasped. Marshall, they're beautiful, she breathed, taking the flowers from his hands and leaning towards him for a kiss. I had to do something to apologize. It wasn't fair for me to take my frustrations out on you. I really am sorry. I really am sorry, Hannah. I know, Marshall. I made dinner, she said with a smile, bringing the roses to the counter and placing them in a vase. Alfredo pasta with shrimp, tomatoes, and spinach is tonight's mix and match of the evening. Somebody's getting creative in the kitchen, he said to her with a smirk. Well, it tastes delicious. I'll take your word for it, he said, sitting down at the small breakfast nook and waiting for a bowl. You'd better. How's work going? Are things better between you and Mr. Aberdeen? Yeah, they are. It was stupid of us to ever have Lafnidosphere, Marshall said softly, taking a bite of his dinner. It's very good, he said, making Hannah smile. Thank you, but what I don't get is why did you leave, Marshall? This guy at Lich King's recording studio offered us the world, a huge pay raise, more tours. He turned out to be tapped. I'm just glad they dissolved our contracts. Hannah, he's been reaching out for the last month now, wanting me back. He's not taking my refusal to join his new company well. Honestly, I'm pretty concerned. He's gotten completely out of control. Well, what's he been saying? All sorts of stuff, like the typical "you'll regret it" and you're making the worst choice of your career. Marshall, Hannah, I don't want to be in a band with anyone else. I wanted Billy, Dan, and Nick. I know, love, she said, placing her hand on his cheek. I don't think you have too much to be worried about, Marshall. People always say those kinds of things. Has he said or done anything that would constitute a little threat? Like threaten to hurt you? Hannah asked. Yeah, he has. Marshall watched as she paled. What did he say? When? Tonight, he said, watching her go wide-eyed. When I told him that I was never going back to him and that I'm staying with Nidosphere, he said, even at the price of your life? Marshall, Hannah breathed in shock. That's something you have to go to the police with. You can't keep it quiet like this. He's threatening your life. They won't follow that as a threat. I'm sure he's just blowing smoke, Hannah, Marshall said, trying his best not to worry her. The band was the genre's highest grossing musical sensation. After losing Nick and Dan the way we did, who wouldn't flip after losing us? Now, will you at least be more careful, please? Like, more cautious if you have to be? She asked, concern radiating from her. Of course I will, Hannah Banana. I will be sure to look both ways twice before crossing the street, he said with a grin while she slapped his arm. I'm serious, Marshall. So am I. Everything's gonna be okay, I promise, he said with a smile. Reaching out, he caressed her cheek. His thumb gently rubbed back and forth on her skin. With a smile, Hannah placed her hand over his, kissing his palm. I know it'll be okay, but I worry, she said softly before leaning forward to kiss her husband. Dinner was over quickly, and in no time Marshall and Hannah were sitting on the couch watching mindless television. It was honestly just something to do to pass the time. Finally, after a sudden thought, Hannah looked up at her husband. Marshall? She asked, placing her hand on his thigh to catch his attention. Yes, love? He turned to face her, and Hannah waited a moment before saying it. Marshall, I want to have another baby. Hearing this, he stared at Hannah in surprise before grinning. Pulling her close, he kissed her. My God, I thought you'd never ask, he said, the excitement in his voice plainly obvious. You mean you want another one too? Hannah breathed, sounding hopeful. Of course I do. I have for years. If you wanted 10, I'd be up for that too. The best thing I've ever done with my life was being a father. So let's go. Come on, get up, he said, taking her hand and tugging her along with him from the couch. Hannah was so surprised by his admittance that she was confused as to why he was making her stand. He noticed this, and smirking seductively, he pulled her into his arms, holding her firmly against him. Sweetie, this is the best part about having kids, he said, now whispering into her ear. We've got to make the baby, and I want us to do that right now. Hearing this, Hannah smiled up at him. Taking his hand and keeping up with his every step, they raced into the bedroom. 4 months until current time. After weeks of trying, Hannah sat in the bathroom holding the test in her hand as she waited. It was one of the longest 5 minutes of her life. Hearing the beeping of the bus, Hannah stood walking to the front door and grabbing the umbrella. It was 12:30 and Marshall was home from kindergarten. He raced off the bus that they had requested special just to transport him. His father had paid for most of the window replacements. Now they were tinted dark and kept their son safe as well. Mama, today we made Play-Doh and then we made finger paints out of old markers. It was so cool, Marshall Lee said excitedly as they made their way into the house. You did? That's amazing, Hannah said with a smile as he shuffled off his backpack, handing it to her. They even let us keep it. I'll show you in a second. I have to pee. In typical 5-year-old fashion, he took off running to the bathroom. Hannah shook her head with a smirk. Sometimes their son was something else. Bringing the bag into the living room, She emptied it of all the papers, leaving the finger paints and Play-Doh inside for him to pull out. Hannah flipped through the papers. She smiled, spotting his good grades. The colored pictures impressed her. Their son's edge work was impeccable. Finding the school calendar they sent home monthly, Hannah stuck it to the fridge. It was May, so she knew to expect an influx of Mother's Day to come flooding in, and she couldn't wait. Mom, this thingy was on the counter. What is it? Marshall asked, handing her the pregnancy test, which Hannah took quickly. Oh, baby, it's nothing you have to worry about, just grown up stuff, she said with a smile while Marshall stared at her skeptically. Mama, I know what that is. It's for adding. Why else would there be a plus on it? He said, shaking his head as if wondering how foolish his mother could be to leave her math supplies in the bathroom. Wait a minute. Marshall's an only child. Hearing this, Hannah immediately looked at the pregnancy test. He was right. It was positive. So look it, I made my Play-Doh red, Marshall said, pulling out the Ziploc bag, completely unaware of his mother's stupefied happiness. Marshy baby, give Mommy a minute. I forgot I had to call Daddy. Give me just a second, she said, walking over to the house phone in the kitchen, quickly dialing his cell phone. Hello, my love. Hi, Marshall's home. Hi, Marshall's home. When will you be? She asked, trying to hold back her excitement. Maybe around 5:30, but I can be there earlier if you want me to be. I really, really want you to come home soon, Marshall, Hannah said, now unable to hold back the excitement in her voice. Well, I'm only working on contractual paperwork. I can bring it home. I'm not recording today, so I guess I'm on the way. I'll see you two in a little bit. Okay, Marshy and I might run out for a few things for dinner if we're gone when you get back. No problem. I'll see you two in a little bit, unless there's something you want to tell me now. Hannah could practically hear his grin through the phone. The test was positive, she said excitedly. I'll see you very soon then, Marshall said excitedly before hanging up. Hannah turned to face her son, who stood staring at her with a pout. Mom, you were talking about the Play-Doh, he said, holding up the bag, and kneeling down, Hannah took it, squishing it in the bag. Wow, Moshe, you make really good Play-Doh. You should work in a Play-Doh factory, she said with a smile. Nope, I'm gonna make music like Daddy does. You are? She asked, smiling at him. Daddy says that he makes a difference in the world and that his music makes it a better place. I want to do that too, the small boy said with a smile, now handing his mother his finger paints. Look, this one I made green. They spent almost 20 minutes marveling over the finger paints and Play-Doh before Hannah herded her son into the car and they headed to the store. Marshall Lee was talking a mile a minute in the back about his day at school. Doo doo. In the grocery store, she decided on chicken and mashed potatoes. Marshall agreed, but only if she were to dye the potatoes red. Hannah used this opportunity to sneak him some more vegetables and snagged a can of beets on the way by to hide in the potatoes. Together they checked out, and being sure he was covered properly, Hannah hurried to the car, Marshall climbing in the back, while his mother loaded the trunk. The drive back home was much quieter because he had fallen asleep in the back. They arrived at the same time as Marshall did, and in true parenting fashion, they split up their responsibilities. Marshall carrying their son in, and Hannah getting the 3 bags of groceries for dinner. Geez, the kid's not, Marshall said, shutting the door to their son's bedroom. He had a very exciting day. Today they made finger paints and Play-Doh. They're both on the table if you want to check them out. He did a very good job, she said as she unbagged the groceries. Oh, just so you know, the Play-Doh tastes like Play-Doh. The only reason I know this is because your son shoved it in my mouth, Hannah said, shaking her head as Marshall laughed. I think I'll take a pass on the taste test, thanks, he said with a grin as he watched her move around the kitchen, putting away the groceries and simultaneously prepping dinner. Eventually, she grew self-conscious about his staring. What? What? Now Marshall simply grinned at her. I can't believe we're really having another baby. You're 100% sure you're pregnant? He asked, leaning on the counter. I am. The test came up positive. Just to be doubly sure, I've already set up a doctor's appointment for next week to confirm everything with a blood test, Hannah said as she peeled potatoes in the sink. Suddenly she felt her husband's arms wrapping around her, and his hands resting on her lower abdomen. We're gonna have a baby, and I get to be here for everything this time. The excitement in his voice made Hannah's heart swell. I get to watch your belly grow. I get to see ultrasound pictures and hear its heartbeat. I'll get to feel the first kicks. This is going to be amazing, he breathed, nuzzling his face into the crook of her neck. It is. I can't wait, Hannah said, turning to kiss the top of his head. 1 month until current time. I'm just saying that these things taste horrible. That doesn't mean I'm going to stop taking my prenatal vitamins, Marshall. It's just like eating chalk, Hannah said in the passenger seat as her hand rested on her belly. Are we not an advanced enough society that we're unable to make a prenatal vitamin that tastes like chocolate or like a kid's gummy vitamin? My vitamins taste like gummy bears, Marshall Lee piped in from the back. See, why can't mine taste like gummy bears? Marshall just shook his head, trying to suppress a grin as he focused on the road. Today they were heading to Today they were heading to the doctor's office for the first view of their baby. Today they would also be telling Marshall Lee that he was going to be a big brother. They'd made it more than halfway there when they were hit on the passenger side. They'd been crossing the intersection when they were struck by a speeding truck, going through a red light. The only thing Marshall could register were the sounds. The sound of his wife and son screaming, the sounds of shattering glass and wrenching metal, the sound of the wind as the car flipped. He blacked out. What woke him was the sound of his son crying. This, though, wasn't normal crying. Something was wrong. He had to be hurt. Forcing the darkness at bay, Marshall opened his eyes. Everything was blurry and out of focus. Blinking, he turned to face the back seat, finding the tinted windows that kept his son safe from the sun had been shattered. The seatbelt was stuck, keeping his child trapped in the seat. The sun was cooking him alive. Already his skin was a bright red. Without a second thought, Marshall pulled off his shirt. Ignoring the pain as he did so, he covered his crying son with it, shielding him from the sun's harsh rays. Next, he checked on Hannah, gently wiping the blood from her face. She sat there silent and unmoving as he did so. She was bleeding from a cut just below her eyebrow, her window too shattered from the impact. He could see a crowd of people looking at them. Catching a flicker of a familiar face, Marshall felt his blood chill. He swore he could see a familiar suited figure standing among the crowd of onlookers. When he blinked again, the man was gone, vanished among the people in the shifting crowds. Just as the sound of sirens met his ears, the darkness engulfed him. He wished it had been the sound of the heart monitors that woke him. He wished it had been physical pain that had jarred him awake, or even the nurses poking and prodding him with needles, but it wasn't. Marshall woke to heartbroken sobs. Oh my God. It was a sound he wished he'd never have to hear coming from his wife ever again. Marshall looked around the hospital room. Quickly, he spotted Hannah in the bed next to him. She sat, her face buried in her pillow as she continued to cry. Hannah was oblivious to his gaze upon her. The sound of her tears wrenched at his heart, and mustering up his energy, he spoke. Hannah! Marshall! Hannah wore nothing but a hospital gown, and her wrist was in a cast. On her fair skin on her right side, he could see large dark bruises from the crash. He pushed himself up, feeling a sharp pain in his ribs as he sat upright. After a moment, he fiddled with the bed rail before it collapsed down. Swinging his legs over the side, he motioned for her to come over. She did, limping her way over to him. Despite the pain, he took Hannah into his arms, holding her tightly as she cried. The commotion the two had caused finally brought a nurse in to investigate. I'm Allison, your nurse. Can you tell me your name? Marshall Abidier, where's my son? He's in pediatrics. He has first and second degree burns on his face, arms, and neck. This is the first time you've woken since you were brought in this afternoon. You have four fractured ribs and mild concussion, he said in a matter-of-fact voice. And my wife? He asked as now she cried harder. She has severe bruising on her right leg and arm. Her shoulder and knee are sprained and her wrist is fractured. I'm also very sorry to say this, but seeing Hannah shake her head, the woman paused, understanding. I'll give you both some time. The nurse left, and Marshall looked down into Hannah's teary eyes. She wanted to be the one to tell him. She didn't want it to come from the nurse. She wanted to tell him. Marshall, I lost the baby, Hannah said in a choked voice. I lost our baby. She broke down in his arms. Marshall held her so much tighter now, feeling as she clung to him, her body racked with sobs. Despite the pain she felt as he held her, it was just what Hannah needed. She so desperately needed him, and he was doing everything he could for her in this moment. It's okay. We'll never forget the baby. We can try again in a few months, okay? He asked softly, running his fingers through her hair. Marshall continued rocking her back and forth. They stayed like that for what seemed to be the longest time until Hannah moved, shuffling from his lap. Do you want to go see Marsh? Marshall asked, watching as she nodded, wiping their eyes. Together, each supporting the other, they made their way to the pediatrics to go see their son. Oh my God, she lost her baby. They lost their baby. That is just, oh God. Oh my God. They were all out of the hospital a week later. While Marshall Lee was at school, his parents talked. Hannah, I think we should move. I think we should just pack up and get out of here. This place is getting out of control, he said, watching as slowly she eased into her seat with her mug of coffee. How far do you want to move? She asked, now looking at her spreadsheets. I'm thinking Carver, near your parents. Now Hannah stared in shock. She'd actually gasped. This was either bad or good. There would be no in between with this. Sweetie, that's more than 100 miles. I could never make that commute. I'd have to quit my job. You only work 3 days a week anyways, Hannah. Now she looked hurt. Marshall, I go into work 3 days a week. The other three I work from home. I love my job. I'm going places there. You know I'm up for a huge promotion. I can't leave my job now. I'd be crazy to. I won't, she said, shaking her head. Hearing this, Marshall sighed. Will you at least think about it, Hannah, please? I'll think about it, but I truly doubt that I'll change my mind, Marshall. With the takeovers going on there and the changes, I'm not kidding. I could be in line for a big promotion. I know I am. I've been discussing it with the director of my section. If he's made vice president, I get his job. That makes me a head director of a company, and we'd never have to worry about money ever. We already don't have to worry about it, Hannah. With the record sales for my last three CDs, we never have to worry about a single cent for the rest of our lives. Neither would Marshall. It would all go to him and whatever other children we have at that point. You know you don't have to work, Hannah. Now she sighed in frustration. I got an education for a reason, Marshall. This is something I love doing. You know what? The answer's no. I'm not moving and I'm not losing this opportunity. I can't. Unless you can find a way to get me to work on time every day, then I'll do it, but there's no way, Marshall. I'm sorry. With that, Hannah stood and limped from the room, wincing at the pain in her leg, and leaving Marshall alone with his thoughts. Current time. So by current time, they mean 18 years ago, like the time that Marshall's dad died. So they're gonna explain what happened. There was a dead argument a month later, especially when she got the promotion. The promotion, though, was not the one she'd expected. Hannah received the promotion to vice president of communications. Seeing how absolutely happy it made her, Marshall knew he couldn't ask her to move again. Still, his nerves nagged at him. He'd seen neither hide nor hair of Anderson since their rooftop meeting. He couldn't help but feel that Anderson wasn't done with him yet, that he'd had something to do with that car accident. Everyone was better since the accident, and life had gone back to normal. Hannah worked her days in the city, Marshall worked his days with Hudson, and little Marshall went to school. His skin was now back to its usual hue. Because everything was so normal and mundane, Marshall decided that it was the perfect day to take Marshall Lee to go see a movie, especially since out in theaters were both a new zombie movie and a new vampire movie. Hannah had called to say she'd be a bit late in getting home, and that was fine with him. After dinner, he loaded Marshall into the car and drove to the theater. He was debating whether or not they would partake in a double feature, where once they were in the theater and finished their movie, they'd run to the restroom and just hop over to the next movie. That's something I used to do like all the time. I used to love double features, but these days drinking that much soda makes me kind of sick, so I decided to stop doing it. But I used to do that like a lot. I used to do that like at minimum once a month, usually once a month. Like if the movie times lined up, I would like specifically plan a movie so the times would line up. It was already 8:30 and his son was wired. Marshall made sure of it, grabbing ice cream, soda, and popcorn before the movie. He couldn't have been more proud because not only did his son stay awake through the movie like a champ, he was probably the most excited patron in the theater. That didn't last long, though. He had managed to stay awake for the bloody, gory zombie spectacular, but by the time the movie ended, it was past 11 o'clock at night. They were the last to leave the theater and walking to the bathroom. Marshall lifted his son onto the counter. Wetting a paper towel, he cleaned the remnants of the fish and chips ice cream he'd devoured earlier from his face. Marshy was exhausted, and it was obvious. Do you want me to carry you to the car, little buddy? Marshall asked, watching as his son scowled at him. I'm a big boy, Dad. I can walk, he said with a huge yawn, making his father grin. Okay, you can walk if you want to, he said, lifting him from the counter and setting him on the ground. Taking his son's hand, they headed toward the exit. Marshall Lee was lagging behind to the point where he grabbed the back of his father's shirt to keep walking. Marshall glanced at the clock and smirked. His son was a trooper. It was almost 11:30. He pushed open the glass doors to the theater as a car pulled up. Slowly he walked out so Marshall Lee Abadir, in all his little stubborn glories, could keep up. Honestly, he'd thought about picking his son up, knowing that the moment he did, the boy would knock out in his arms without objection. But he wanted to walk. Marshall was never happier in his life that he hadn't lifted his son into his arms when he caught sight of the man pointing the gun at him. It was one of Litch's men, the one who'd lunged for him those short few months ago. Litch sends you his regards. Almost immediately, Marshall felt his son bump into his leg. No. Quickly, his hand flew to Marshall's head, keeping his son behind him. Listen, man, don't do anything rash. Please, I've got my kid with me. I'll give you everything I have, okay? Just this once, go home, he said, quickly pulling out his wallet and tossing it to him. Slowly, the man lowered the weapon. Marshall, watching the gunman, glanced down at his son, who was peeking out from behind him. "One of you has to die. Lich's orders," he said. To Marshall's horror, the man aimed the gun at his son. He felt his heart drop. Quickly he turned, ducking down and grabbing his son, shielding him from the man before them. Nothing could happen to his son. He couldn't lose Marshall, too. Hannah couldn't lose Marshall, too. He'd never even met the baby, and losing it had caused such an irreparable hole in his heart. They couldn't lose their son. He'd died before he let that happen. He didn't remember what had happened. He just remembered the several loud cracks of the gun and hitting the ground with his son in his arms. He heard the sound of squealing tires. It felt like white hot bars had been shoved through his body. He was trying his best to hold every ounce of pain back. He had to have screamed. His throat felt raw. Quickly, he checked his son, lifting his shirt to check. Marshall needed to be okay. He had to be. He needed to see with his own eyes that his son was okay. The pain was immense, and with every movement, he fought to hold back a scream. That's all he wanted to do, just scream in utter agony. "Marshall, are you okay, kiddo?" he asked, checking him for any possible injury. He didn't see anything. He didn't look hurt at all. It was a miracle. Marshall was okay. His vision began swimming as he blinked back tears. "Yes, Daddy." "Are you hurt?" Everything was so foggy. Gently, he touched his son's cheek. He was still here, still safe. "N- No. He pulled out his cell phone and no. He pulled out his cell phone and instructed his son to dial 911. He didn't know how he was able to talk with such a clear voice and answer all the man's questions. He was fighting unconsciousness, and suddenly he could feel Marshall petting his head. "It's okay, Daddy, it's okay," he said softly, his cheeks wet with tears. He could taste blood in his mouth now, and he began coughing uncontrollably. Excruciating stabs of pain came with each cough. The stronger they grew, the more lightheaded he became. Marshall continued talking to the 911 operator, but knew that his time was short. The pain now was starting to fade. He knew he was dying. This was it. He'd saved his son. The man hadn't come back, and Marshall was safe. It didn't matter if he was dying because his son's life was more important. It was so much more important than his was. Marshall Lee would live. He would get a chance to live his life. He would get a chance to it all. Breathing was now painfully difficult. He felt as if he was drowning, and every time he coughed, more blood would come out. "I love you, Marshall." Everything was fading so fast, and the darkness engulfed him. Before he knew it, it was as if he was watching a movie of his life. Marshall could see memories from his childhood. He could feel the excitement of youth. He could see memories from his teenage years, when he first put together the band. He could see fun times with Dan, talks of all sorts with Nick, and so many jam sessions with Billy. Memories of playing on stages of all sizes and feeling the utter thrill of it. The adoration. He saw the first night he'd met Hannah. Then the next time they met, when she was 7 months pregnant with his son. He saw their wedding and Marshall's birth, his first steps and his first words. He saw days spent at home, and evenings spent playing with his son, time alone with his wife, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, celebrations, nights out, nights in. There was so much love and happiness, and everything they had together was so beautiful. She was so beautiful. Hannah. Marshall Lee sat on the ground beside his father. His head lay on his chest, crying loudly. He watched the man run. He jumped into the car and sped off. He watched another car go by, this one with the window down, watching them briefly before it too had gone. They were alone now, and he was scared. His father had stopped talking. He couldn't feel the steady thumping beneath his cheek anymore, but feel the rise and fall of his chest. The arm that had once held him so securely had slid down his back. At this, he cried harder. Hearing a sound, he looked up, watching as a car pulled into the parking lot. It was the same car that had driven by slowly for the first time. Now he shook his father as he tried waking him. "Daddy! Daddy, wake up!" He watched as the car parked and the door opened, a man stepping out, walking towards him. "Daddy, the people are here! Daddy!" Again he buried his face into his father's chest, crying. He was scared. The piercing sounds of sirens met his ears. When he looked up, Marshall could see flashing lights. The man was gone. Dear Hannah, my love, it's not that I delight in leaving you with a dark, empty home to come home to, but you're brave. You will survive the darkness. But just in case, I left the night light on in the hall. I took Marsha on a monthly movie excursion. The kids geeking over that new zombie mayhem remake. We really made a mini me. Can you believe it? I checked the times and we should be home before midnight. XOXO, always yours, love Marshall. She wasn't worried. Hannah had found the note when she got home at 10. She'd taken a shower and made herself some dinner and waited. This wasn't unusual. It wasn't common, but it wasn't unusual either. Marshall would take their son to the movies at least once a month if something cool was released. As the time passed, though, Hannah grew increasingly more uneasy. She'd eaten, washed her dishes, and put aside a plate for Marshall in the microwave. She made a quick Alfredo with spinach and shrimp. This she hoped would be the perfect surprise for him. Somehow she knew he would understand what she was trying to say with the meal. Glancing at the clock, she frowned. It was getting closer to midnight. Maybe they were stuck in traffic. That was reasonable. The theater was only a 15-minute drive by highway. Sitting on the couch, she powered on the TV, watching reruns. Seeing headlights flash along the windows, Hannah looked over, feeling her hopes drop. With a sigh, she watched a car drive by. She looked at the clock again, and it was past midnight. Hannah began pacing. Now she was worried. Marshall was never late like this, never. As she walked through the kitchen on what felt like her millionth lap, the phone began ringing. Turning, she grabbed the phone. Marshall? Marshall? Is this Hannah Abadir? Yes, Hannah said, feeling her heart drop. I'm sorry to inform you, but there's been an accident. Furious wasn't the word. Mere moments after he'd stepped out of the car towards the boy, the sound of sirens pierced the night air. Police cars, fire trucks, and paramedics began flooding the scene. He couldn't have reached the child without drawing unnecessary attention. It was over. There was nothing more that could be done, not without unnecessary risk. Stepping back, he got into the car, once again being driven away. It was official. This was over. He'd been bundled into a blanket and passed from the officer to the nurse at the hospital. He was checked over by the woman and promptly brought to another room. This one was bigger with couches and a television. An older woman came into the room, and the nurse left. Marshall didn't know what to do. He wanted to be held. He wanted his mom, and he desperately wanted his father. The woman sat on the couch, and he listened to the clicking sounds from the stick in her the woman sat on the couch, and he listened to the clicking sounds from the sticks in her hands. That looked like something his mom did, except she only used one stick. He watched her sticks turn the string of yarn into something bigger. She looked up, watching him watch her knit, and patted her lap. You can come sit with me, sweetie. It's okay. After a moment of hesitation, Marshall crept forward, sitting next to her on the couch. Feeling her fingers trail down the back of his head, he closed his eyes, leaning into the touch. Oh, sweetie, you must be so tired, she said softly as he leaned against her. Her hand ran along his head. They stayed that way until he'd fallen asleep, his head in her lap. Hours had passed, and the room to the door opened once again. Hannah walked in, escorted by the police officer. The moment she spotted her son, she swept the sleeping child into her arms. She sat there holding him tightly, rocking him back and forth. The ride home was quiet, the seat next to her empty. Hannah glanced into the back seat. Her son was still asleep. She pulled into the driveway, carrying Marshall Lee into the house. Everything was so quiet, and the first thing she noticed was that the nightlight was still on in the hall. Hannah changed him into his pajamas, and carried Marshall to their bed, climbing in as well. Closing her eyes that night, Hannah prayed to anyone who would listen not to wake up. Her prayers that night weren't answered. Hannah opened her eyes the next morning and was met with the watery eyes of her son. Climbing into her open arms, he snuggled against her chest. Hannah wrapped the blanket tighter around them. Mommy? Yes, baby? Daddy's not coming home? She never imagined her heart could break further. Hannah needed a moment before she spoke. No, Daddy's not coming home. Because he died? Now she choked back a sob. Yes, because he died. Because he got hurt? Yes. I want him to come home, Mommy, Marshall said, tears now streaming down his cheeks. I do too. The funeral had been the next week, and it had been a private affair. The only person left in Marshall's family was his son, so it was no surprise to Hannah that the massive majority of people paying their respects were her family. What she hadn't expected was on the last day of the funeral to hear the familiar sound of a motorcycle. Hannah thought maybe it was just someone driving by, but it wasn't. Billy walked into the room. Hannah watched, holding her son back as Billy went to pay his respects to his best friend. He stayed there for the longest time, and after wiping his eyes, he stood walking over to them. Marshall looked up at her, and Hannah sighed. Without a second thought, he ran to his godfather, hugging him tightly, Billy lifting him into his arms. How are you? Hannah asked as they approached. I should be asking you that. This is the most difficult thing I've ever had to do, she said softly. Saying goodbye? Knowing that I have to live every day for the rest of my life without him. That my son will grow up without his father. At this, Hannah closed her eyes. I never could picture a face when I thought about who I would spend my life with. I never imagined falling in love, let alone with a guy I met singing at a bar, she said softly. How did you know you actually loved him? He took me to the beach, built a fire in the sand to keep me warm, and gave me his jacket when that wasn't enough. Then we talked for hours, not just about little things, but everything. By the end of the night, all I knew was that this man who I'd known for just a few hours, I felt so intimately connected to somehow. All I knew is he felt like home. He always felt like home. Marshall knew the moment you said his name, Billy said, watching her eyes widen. This past year, all we did was argue over you. But I was wrong. I was wrong about you, Hannah, and I'm sorry. Thank you. If there's anything you ever need from Marshall, please let me know. I will. Feeling a hand on her shoulder, Hannah turned, seeing the gentleman who ran the funeral home. The time to close the casket and head to the cemetery has come, Mrs. Abigail. We will clear the room for you and your son. We will close the casket and place it into the hearse. Hannah nodded, and faster than she would have liked, the room was cleared. It was just she, Marshall, and her husband left in the room. It was time to say goodbye. Hannah walked toward the casket with their son in her arms, placing her hand on her husband's chest. She could feel the photo she'd slipped beneath his shirt earlier. It was one of she and Marshall Lee to keep close to her heart. To his heart. As she stepped forward, their son leaned towards his father, resting his head on his chest for the last time. He began to cry. Leaning down herself, Hannah pressed her lips to Marshall's forehead before resting hers against his. I love you, Marshall. You were the love of my life. I was ready to take on forever with you, but I was never ready to say goodbye. Hannah gave their son as long as he needed, but once they'd stepped back, the funeral workers were there closing the lid to the casket. After their last glimpse, Hannah closed her eyes. Thank you for protecting our son. All right, that was awesome. I'm gonna be back for another chapter in a little bit. And this one looks like it's shorter, which would be nice. Yeah, it looks like it's shorter, so that'd be nice. I'm still gonna try and do two more chapters tonight, then hopefully three more chapters tomorrow and three more chapters on Sunday. That's my plan. So, be back in a few. Chapter 109 Catastrophic. Ignitus lay in the darkness, listening to the silence of the bedroom. True to his word, he'd held Marceline as the hours passed. He'd intended on following through as his well, he intended on following through on his word, at least until the sound of the bedroom door opening met his ears. Cracking an eye open, he watched Hudson peek in, watching them for a moment before closing the door. Realizing Marceline, Ignitus Releasing Marceline, Ignitus slid from beneath her. Gently he lay on the bed before walking from the room. He spotted Hudson in the hall, and at the sound of the door closing, he turned around. I apologize for waking you. I wasn't asleep, but Hudson, I've got to ask, why'd you fire Marcy? You know this wasn't her fault, he said, watching as Hudson looked to the ground before looking to his son-in-law. Come walk with me, he said, motioning for Ignitus to follow. They walked down the halls, passing the library, and entered a room Ignitus had never been in before. A quick glance around, and he knew immediately that it was Hudson's office. He watched as Hudson poured a glass of whiskey for himself after handing the first to him. To two men who love Marceline, I feel I can explain this to you and gain your understanding and support of my reasoning, Hudson said, taking a sip from his glass as he leaned against the desk. Sit, he said, motioning to the chair across from him, Hudson doing as he asked. First, first for you, a question. How many people do you think I employ at Nidosphere? He asked, watching as Ignitus looked at him curiously. Hundreds, probably. Over 2,000, he said in a matter-of-fact voice, watching the surprise on his face. Thousands, from the board of directors to janitorial to the HR department, interns, public relations, and much more. While I pride myself on the diversity of my staff, from color to race, disability status, and so on, I'm more than aware that 80% of my staff are male. Not intentionally, of course, it's just how it's been in this male-dominated industry. Knowing that email is sent company-wide, can you genuinely tell me Marceline would be comfortable standing alone in a room full of men who have seen her like that? He asked, staring at Ignitus. Do you think she'd be able to come into work every day and feel safe? To physically be safe? Maybe while she continued shadowing me, sure, but what happens when I'm not there? Do you truly think there wouldn't be someone entitled enough who thought he could put his hands on her just because he's seen this video? He asked, watching Ignitus blink in surprise. I didn't remove Marceline from her position to hurt her, and I know from your perspective it doesn't feel that way. I did it to protect her and to keep her safe, Hudson said, draining his glass and refilling it. He offered the bottle to Ignitus, who shook his head, holding up his untouched glass. Yeah, I think he's done with alcohol and drugs. I can understand that, Hudson, genuinely, he said. I can't argue with you on that logic either. In your shoes, with your knowledge, I'd have made that exact same choice. But there has to be something you can do. Marcy cried herself to sleep tonight. I won't be changing my mind on this, Ignitus. Cybersecurity has already intercepted and diverted over 200 emails being sent to her from varying sources, and all of them are explicit and of a sexual nature. 200? And that was just by the end of business day today. I've already dismissed 8 employees who were foolish enough to send such an email using their work addresses. This business is full of predatory people, Ignitus. Not everybody has your heart or your morals, he said, now standing and reaching for Ignitus's untouched glass, which he handed over. Drinking right now wasn't on his short list of things to do. He was too hungry for that. If working truly means so much to Marceline, I can bring her paperwork to do, but everything would go through me. There would be zero contact with any individual under contract. Any employee, zero email ability, none. She wouldn't like that, he said softly. Ignitus couldn't help but nod because Hudson was right. Marcy would hate that. So you basically wanted to step back until this blows over? Marceline has a lifetime to learn the music business. She's only 23 and in the middle of a major scandal that could absolutely destroy her career before it even gets off the ground. Yes, I very much wanted to step back from the company for a while, perhaps a year or two. The sudden sound of Ignitus's loudly growling stomach was heard, and immediately Hudson raised an eyebrow. Have you not eaten? I didn't get the chance to. Well, head to the kitchen and grab yourself something to eat before you head back to bed. Unless you're still getting lost. No, Ig said, looking away from the man before him. Do you need help finding the kitchen? Maybe, he said, feeling embarrassment as Hudson smiled, standing. Come along with me, he said, patting his shoulder as he passed him. Ignitus stood and followed Hudson down another series of halls and into the kitchen. Would you like me to stay so you can get back to your room while your meal is still hot? He couldn't help but grin. Yes, please. Hudson stayed, watching as Ignitus looked around the cabinet, settling on a ramen packet. It didn't take long for him to whip up a bowl, and as they walked back to the bedroom, he spoke again. Thank you for coming to check on her earlier. Hudson nodded before making a face and looking at his son-in-law. Has Marceline had night terrors with you? Not that I'm aware of. Trust me, you'd know if she had. She would have them fairly often growing up after we would fight. It's one of the many reasons I stopped to check on her. Why does she have them? I'm ashamed to say this, but it's because of me. Simon informed me years ago that they were a trauma response. When Marceline's mother passed away, devastated wasn't the word. I felt like every ounce of love and light in my life had been taken from me. Before I kept a busy schedule, and I wasn't the father I should have been to her, Hansen said softly, his voice full of regret. After I was more than worse, I went on a drinking binge with until I went on a drinking binge after I lost her. I would drink until I blacked out. Some days I would go to the house, most of the time I didn't. It was only on that last day that I finally walked into the house ready to face home without my love. Did I realize that I hadn't seen my daughter in weeks? The house was a mess and there was no food left, and what was more than bad, and what was more than bad. She'd eaten through every box of cereal she could reach, boxes of dried pasta, uncooked oatmeal, all of it. She'd been completely alone for weeks until Simon came to get her. He lived in another country then, and his visits were very infrequent. I left an almost 5-year-old alone for the better part of 2 months. To say she struggles with abandonment issues because of my selfishness would be an understatement. Ignitus could do nothing but stare in silence. Marceline had told him none of this, though granted he never asked her. He never thought to. He never imagined Marcy would experience something like that in her lifetime. It explains a lot, though. She's panicked a few times now, asking if I was going to leave her, Ig said quietly, earning Hudson's saddened look. Marcy's all I want. She's my dream. I will fight for her, go to war for her, and die for her if I have to. I mean, I already did, but I'll do it again. There's nothing that could ever happen that would make me let her go. I've been trying to figure out for years what we offer each other because we're so different. Wait, oh, never mind. Ignitus said all that. Forget it. I said it in Hudson's voice. Just whatever. Ignitus, you're consistent. Do you think Marcy and I didn't talk? She spoke of you constantly, which is why it came as such a surprise to me when Mr. Graham came into the picture. We'll discuss this more later, though, should you wish. It's late and your food's getting cold. Have a good night, son. Wait. Hudson paused, turning to face him. Is there anything I should know? Or anything I can do? For the night terrors, I mean. She doesn't wake up during them. She might seem awake, but she's asleep the whole time. Sometimes she screams, sometimes she cries. Just hold her. She'll talk sometimes, he said softly. Talking can help. Ignatius watched as Hudson vanished down the hall, and turning, he entered the bedroom. He could see Marceline laying on the bed illuminated by the moonlight. She looked so peaceful. Quickly devouring his bowl of noodles, he drained the bowl, and after a brief trip to the bathroom to brush his teeth, he slipped back into bed. Pulling Marceline close, he felt as she turned in her sleep, her hand gripping his shirt. She curled against him, allowing his arm to slip around her waist. Turning his head, Ignitus kissed her temple. Closing his eyes, he began mulling over what he and Hudson had discussed tonight. Ash sat next to the bed, watching as the doctor flipped through his mother's chart. He'd had to wait through several rounds of scans, and it was killing him. Her ICP has lowered steadily. They also removed the hematoma. Our most recent scans show no more signs of bleeding. Your mother is on track for a fantastic recovery. So she's doing okay? He asked, daring to hope. She's doing very well. She's exceeded my expectations, frankly. At the rate she's going, she'll be home this time next week, the doctor said as Ash smiled. That would be more than awesome. So Ma's completely stable? Do we have to worry about any effects from her hitting her head too hard? The worst of what could have happened has passed. Right now it's just daily recovery. You should head home and get some rest yourself. Your mother will be just fine. You think? Ash asked tentatively. He didn't want to leave, not if his mom wasn't okay. I absolutely do. Okay. Seeing his hesitation, the doctor placed his hand on Ash's shoulder. Stop by the nurse's station before you go. Leave your number, and I'll leave my number for you there. If you have any concerns, you can reach out to me personally, and should anything change, we'll inform you immediately. Ash patted himself down in search of his phone, sighing in annoyance, realizing again that it was missing. You can leave our phone number if that's okay. That's perfect. I'll leave my number at the desk, the doctor said, walking from the room. Ash couldn't help a sigh of relief, and standing, he kissed his mom's forehead. She was going to be okay. Ugh. Looking at the clock, he yawned. It was just before midnight. Shouldering on his jacket, Ash took one last look at his mom before walking from the room. He stopped at the nurse's station, and after grabbing the doctor's number, he went home. He was grateful, more than grateful, that his mom was doing so well. That feeling of happiness vanished when he pulled up to the driveway and was unable to pull in. Cars packed the driveway and the street in front of the house. He could hear music thumping in the house as people milled around. Slamming the car into park, he ripped the keys from the ignition and stormed into the house. People were everywhere, eating, drinking, smoking. He spotted Ashley in the corner of the living room, sitting in some dude's lap with her tongue down the guy's throat. Seething, he beelined towards her. Of course, this was Ashley's doing. He was livid, more than livid. Their mother was possibly dying, and this was what she was too busy doing. The moment he got to her, he planted his boot on her hip and shoved her off the guy's lap, sending her sprawling on the floor. What the hell, Ashton? Ashley screeched, pulling herself to her feet. Don't you dare what the hell me. What is this? Our mom almost died. Well, she's not dead yet, is she? Rage. Pure unadulterated rage. He'd never been this mad, not even with all the crap he'd been through with Ignitus. Snatching her arm, Ash dragged her through the crowd of shocked partiers. Wrenching the door open, he flung her down the steps. He didn't bother to see if she was okay. Walking into the living room, he snatched the radio from its spot on the table, wrenching it from the wall. Raising it over his head, he slammed it to the ground as people scrambled from the room. Everybody get out! The effect was instantaneous as the dozens of people began rushing from the house. In moments, the house was empty and silent. Walking over to the front door, he spotted Ashley standing there on the porch, staring at him. Slamming the door in her face, he locked the door with a resounding click. Can I at least get my keys? Walk home, Ash snapped, walking away from the door, listening as she continued knocking. He spotted her keys in the living room where he'd booted her. Snatching them up, he took the house key off. Opening the door again, he flung them at her, listening to Ashley's yelp of pain as he slammed the door. Doing a quick once through of the house and making sure it was empty, Ash began cleaning. There was trash, food, and plastic cups everywhere. The whole place was trashed. At this moment, Ash wished she could call the guys. Mo would have been over here in a minute to help him clean up while he vented about his sister. Today was the first time Mo had spoken to him outside of work in weeks, and it had been to keep him from damn near being killed. He knew he'd messed up bad when Modestus had started ignoring him. Mo had always had his back. They were best friends, and Ash missed him. Not for the first time, he reached for his phone and sighed in frustration. It was still gone. Gathering the dishes around the house, he dumped them into the sink, filling it with hot water. He was on lap two, circling the house for strays, when he heard knocking at the front door. Ashley, it seemed, was persistent tonight. He walked to the door, opening it with a glare, but blinked in surprise, seeing Mo standing on the doorstep. Hey, he said, opening the door wider now. Mo leaned over, looking behind him. What happened? Mo watched as Ash sighed, giving him a look as he shrugged. They spoke simultaneously. Ashley? Ashley. Figured as much. Mo said, standing there with his hands in his pockets, looking at the ground. Do you want to come in? Ash asked. He didn't have much hope, but was pleasantly surprised when Moko nodded, walking into the house. I called the room to check on Ma, Mo said with a shrug. They said you went home. I figured you wouldn't leave if she wasn't okay. The doctor said she would be home in a week or so, Ash said as he walked through the rooms, grabbing spare dishes he'd missed. As he walked to the kitchen, Mo followed behind him, and Ash knew he wanted to say something. At the risk of sounding like a teenager, in an 80s movie, Ash spoke. Please talk to me, he said as he began working on the dishes. Dude, I'm so mad at you, Mo said as Ash hung his head. I know, but you really don't, though, Ash, Mo said, giving him a pleading look as he shook his head. Dude, I saw things in you that I'd have checked strangers for. I saw you do things I'd have put strangers in check for, but I let it slide because it was you, he said, taking a breath. I watched Marcy flinch when you touched or reached for her. Had she been some rando on the street, I'd have asked her if she was okay and if she needed help. But I didn't do that because it was you, Mo said, watching as Ash continued on with the dishes. I let everything slide because it was you, Ash, because I never thought you'd be capable of hurting someone the way you did. That was my mistake. I should have called you out every time I saw something wrong. I wish you had, Ash said softly, but it's not your responsibility to either. For real, though, what in God's name made you think that setting up a camera was a good idea? I realized that I absolutely should have talked to her about it before I went and did that. You think? Mo said, sounding annoyed. Dude, for real, that whole video was so messed up, he said, pinching the bridge of his nose. You watched it? Ash asked in shock, almost dropping the dish in his hand. How the hell could I look away? It was a flaming train wreck. How could you not read her body language? That's basic rules right there. I mean, I realize she was your first girlfriend, but it's not like you hadn't gotten laid before, Mo said, staring at Ash, watching his ears starting to turn red as he avoided his gaze. When Ash began scrubbing a dish with a little more effort than necessary, realization dawned on him and Mo couldn't help but stare in shock. Are you kidding me? It's still no excuse. No shit, it's no excuse. Why the hell did you lie? Now Ash scoffed. Like you guys wouldn't have busted my ass for being a 20-year-old virgin. Yes, we totally would have. But we wouldn't have gotten on your case for it. We would have given you tips and pointers and all that good shit, he said, running his fingers through his hair. I know I messed up. I just don't know how to fix it. Honestly, right now, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know how to fix this. If I'm being honest, I thought that video was going to go so far left, Moko said, shaking his head. What do you mean? Ash asked, now looking at him. Ash, with how you grabbed her and pinned her to the bed, I didn't think you were going to stop, he said quietly, watching Ash's look of surprise. Marcy definitely didn't think you were going to stop. She was scared and I was scared for her. Ash continued scrubbing the dishes, feeling the weight of Mo's words on him. I don't blame Ignitus for being pissed. All I can do is be a better person. I'm going to work on it every day. I'm going to be better. How? I don't know yet, but I'm not going to be dating for a long time, he said softly. I've already talked to my therapist, and he said that he thinks I made the right choice in focusing on myself. I think you did too. They stood there in silence while Ash continued on with the dishes, and after a beat he spoke. Thank you for earlier today. Dude, the second I saw what was on the video, I knew it was gonna go nuts. But to move forward, I do have to ask. You didn't have anything to do with that video getting out, right? No, I didn't. I really, really didn't, he said, shaking his head. But I understand why you asked. Hearing this, Moko nodded. Spotting the broom in the corner, he grabbed it and began sweeping. Catching the time on the clock, he continued with the sweeping. It was na- it was well past midnight now. Happy birthday, Ash. Hearing this, Ash paused, and turning, he looked at Mo, unable to help a small smile. Thanks. Music blasted in her ears as Kate typed away at the computer. She'd been doing some thinking. She'd thought about it, genuinely, truly thought about it. Researching into Lich had become the hill Modestus had chosen to die on. He'd been cold shouldering her over it for days now. He would talk to her about anything important she wanted to discuss, the bills, the band, but the moment the conversation shifted to anything else, immediate walls came up. Tonight, after pulling the buds from her ears, Kate discovered he'd left without even telling her. Instead, he'd left a note on the kitchen table. Even though he said he'd be back quickly, Kate still didn't like being alone in the house like this, not with what had happened. Doing a quick lap, she found he locked her in and set the alarm. This, she decided, was both like and unlike him. Locking her safely in like she was in Fort Knox, that was like him. Leaving her without telling her wasn't. Whatever he'd had on his mind that led him to leave like this had to be important or he wouldn't have done it. This had been their impasse, and at this point, Kate wanted to concede. The longer this went on, the worse their relationship would be damaged. If this truly genuinely worried him this much, so much that he would dig his heels in like this, she would drop it. For Modestus, she would. She missed him. Marshall's warning had bothered her too. When it came to Lich, they seemed to almost be afraid. Kate knew they didn't like him. She knew what he was capable of, especially with the people who worked for him. She recalled all too well what they were capable of. Were they afraid to set Lich off, or just of what was possibly going to happen next? Walking into the kitchen, Kate began digging through the cabinet, pulling out the ingredients to make a coconut cake. Looking at everything in front of her, Kate grabbed the can of cream of coconut without looking at it. She could remember Modestus talking about stealing sips of a drink his parents would make with it as a kid. Digging through the drawers, she found a recipe book. This was one that belonged to his parents, and more than once she'd found Mo poking through the pages. Kate opened the book, perusing through it, and found only one drink recipe involving cream of coconut. Coquito. Grabbing out the other ingredients, she poured them into the blender, topping it off with coconut rum. She watched as the liquid in the blender became frothy as it blended together. Powering it down, she swiped a finger along the edge, popping it into her mouth. It was delicious, creamy, and sweet. Adding a touch of cinnamon, she took another sip and smiled. Mo would love this. Pouring herself a small glass, Kate sat down on the couch. She was more than prepared to wait for him. This fight ended tonight. While pouring her second glass, Kate heard Mo pull into the driveway. Pouring one for him, Kate stood waiting in the hall. The moment Modestus spotted her, he paused. The silence between them was slowly building. Stepping forward, Kate held out his drink, their hands touching for the briefest of moments as he took it. She watched as he looked at it before taking a small sip. The look on his face was everything as he reached for her. Stepping forward into his open arms, Kate smiled. He held her tightly, Kate closing her eyes, feeling as his lips brushed against her head. I don't like it when we fight, he murmured against her hair. I don't either. I'm sorry. I've been doing some thinking, Kate said softly as she led him to the couch. I've been doing some thinking too. You're always on me about toxic masculinity, yet here you are waiting at the door for me like a 60s housewife. Isn't that toxic femininity somehow? Mo asked, smirking, and with a sigh, Kate couldn't help but smile. I don't know what to do with you half the time. But you love me? Mo asked, leaning towards her. Yes, I do. Bringing her lips to his, Kate smiled. Their kiss tasted like coconut. That was delicious, he said softly, his thumb brushing it across her head between sips of his drink. This coquito tastes exactly like how my dad would make it. Thank you. I wanted to make you something to apologize. I realized how much everything going on with Lich worries you. I promise I'm not going to go snooping into Lich. Kate didn't have a moment to even think before he'd kissed her. The intensity of the kiss stole her breath away, and in a beat she was kissing him back. Thank you, he continued, covering her with kisses. Smiling, Kate slowed him down, giving him slow, deliberate kisses as she did. I can see this has made you very happy. It has. I didn't want anything more to happen to you, Kate. I just want you to be safe. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much of a relief this is, Mo said, pulling back now and smiling at her. I really do hate fighting with you, Modestus. Me too, he whispered, picking up where he'd left off. Ada? I know. I know. Ari's eyes were drooping slowly as she babbled at her mother. You want to tell me everything, my little one? Gently she rocked her, humming softly as she gazed out the window. Fiona admired the night sky as slowly Ari fell asleep in her arms. Staring at her daughter, Fiona couldn't help but smile. In a little over 2 months, she was going to be a year old. A whole year old. She was almost overwhelmed by the thought. So gently she touched the softness of Ari's cheek. Thoughts of her exhaustion were far from her mind now. I love you so much, Fiona whispered, carefully making her way to her feet. Placing her in the crib, and with a brief pause at the threshold, she made her way to bed. Marshall was sound asleep when Fiona, flopping onto the bed, aroused him. He felt as she grabbed her pillow, snuggling into it. Her arm reached out, resting across his chest. Fiona sighed that contented little sigh, and moments later he could hear Arya crying in the next room. Fiona made to push herself up, but Marshall, grabbing her hand and kissing it, stopped her. I've got her, it's my turn, he said, sitting up. I was with her for the last hour or so. I fed her. I think her teething is starting. She's very drooly and bitey, Fiona said tiredly. Marshall walked into the nursery, finding Arya crying, as she stood precariously holding the railing of the crib. Lifting her into his arms, Marshall walked from the room and downstairs. Arya chewed the neck of his t-shirt as Marshall dug through the freezer. Finally, he found what he was looking for, a freezing pop. Giving it a rinse under the cold tap, Marshall showed it to Arya, watching as she reached for the pop. How's it looking, baby girl? Marshall asked, running his fingers along her gums, feeling the smoothness of them, until finally he found a slight bump on the bottom. The moment his fingers touched it, she bit down, whining as she chewed voraciously. He walked into the living room, holding the freeze pop. Lying on the couch, Marshall offered her the pop, watching as Ori chewed. Her head lay tiredly against his shoulder, and in between chews she was babbling. Marshall closed his eyes, feeling her hands squeezing his shirt as he patted her back. Ada? Yes. Yeah? Ada. No way, tell Daddy everything. Mommy did what? Marshall asked with a sleepy grin. As they went back and forth, Marshall could feel himself falling asleep on the couch. Ori, though, was very much awake. Lifting her head, she leaned up, pushing on her chest to lift herself. Adada? Mmm. Dada. Mmm. Marshall's eyes snapped open, and the moment he made eye contact with Ori, she smiled brightly at him, sleepy eyes and all. Dada? Now Marshall couldn't contain his smile. No way! Dada! No way! Dada! She screeched excitedly, flapping her arms and kicking her legs. Now Marshall lifted her over his head, absolutely beaming. You are the most incredible little thing, he said excitedly, now covering her in kisses. Dada. Oh my God, I love you so much, he said, now holding her close. Kissing her head, he felt as she nuzzled her face into his neck, letting out a little sigh. It's genetic. The nuzzle and sigh is genetic. Marshall listened as her breathing deepened, and soon she began snoring softly. He lay quietly, feeling her breathe against him. The freeze pop in her hand had thawed, and adjusting his grip on his daughter, Marshall rinsed it and put it back into the freezer, making a mental note to buy a teething ring. Marshall climbed up the stairs, going to their bedroom. Lying on the bed, Marshall was getting settled in. He felt as Fiona's arm once again snaked across his chest. This time, though, her hand paused, feeling Arya. Now Fiona scooted close under his arm, her arm across his chest, with her hand resting on Ollie's back. With a tired smile, he closed his eyes, leaning his head against Fiona's. Covering her hand with his, Marshall decided that life in this moment was every bit as beautiful as he could ever have imagined it would be. It was beautiful, and he was loving every second of it. The house was getting darker as she walked through the halls. Marcy didn't like it. She reached for the light switch again, stretching onto her toes. It was too far to reach. Marceline could feel her heart pounding as darkness descended on the house. It was quickly creeping in, and it was getting hard to see. Now she hurried down the maze of halls, panting for breath. She was trembling as she ran. It was getting dark again. She had to find him. He had to be here somewhere. The sound of glass shattering behind her had Marcy running as fast as she could in the opposite direction. Now she was running, stumbling through the maze of corridors, sprinting down the hallways as she searched for her father. Daddy? Daddy? She called for him as she sprinted through the never-ending hallways, but all was silent. A sharp pain in her foot made her stop immediately. She could feel her foot throbbing, and when she looked at it, it was covered in blood. The sight made her scream. Daddy! Ignatius woke with a start at the sound of a panicked scream, his heart racing as he scrambled, pushing himself up. Marceline was already sitting up, and to his surprise, she screamed again for her father as she began sobbing. He was floored. When Hudson said night terrors, he didn't imagine this. Gently he reached for her, his hand rubbing her back. Feeling how she leaned into his touch, Ignatius decided to take a risk and pulled her into his lap. I'm right here with you. He was desperately hoping this would soothe her. Marceline's whole body was shaking so hard in his arms as she continued crying. She clung to his shirt as he walked her back and forth, whispering softly into her ear, You're okay, you're okay. I'm alone, she said in a small voice now, breaking down. I'm alone. No, baby, no, you aren't. I'm right here, Ig whispered, holding her tightly against him and kissing the top of her head. I'm right here. He sat there, rocking Marcy back and forth as the minutes passed. It had taken almost an hour for her to stop trembling. Her panic breaths had calmed, and she finally relaxed in his arms. Sighing in relief, Ignitus wiped her cheeks dry, pushing her hair from her eyes. I'm right here, baby, and I promise I'll never let you go, he said softly. Holding her in his arms, Ignitus leaned his head against the headboard. Closing his eyes, he took a breath, feeling as Marcy began trembling again, her breathing picking up. Gently, he shook her shoulder. Marcy? Slowly, her eyes flickered open. You're having bad dreams, love, he said softly, feeling as Marcy curled into him, her eyes heavy with sleep. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, you didn't do anything wrong. Daddy, I'm sorry, Marcy said, dissolving into tears. I'm sorry. Ignitus swore he felt his heart break. She was still sleeping. Now he was racking his brain. There had to be something he could do for her. He's gone. He's gone. I know he's gone, baby. He never should have left you. Marceline nuzzled into his chest, and it reminded him so much of Arya when she was fighting sleep. Suddenly, it was as if a light bulb had gone off. Right now, he was dealing with a scared, tired 4-year-old Marcy. Now, with a whisper of a plan, he spoke softly into her ear. You must be so tired. I'll bet you're exhausted, aren't you? The halls were long and winding, but she found the kitchen. She pulled open the fridge, and the light lit up the room. She pulled the crisper drawers open, looking for food. Almost everything was gone, and what was left was fuzzy, bitter tasting, and had given her a tummy ache. Abandoning the fridge, she turned to the cabinets, opening the ones she could reach. Inside one, she found oatmeal, a box of raisins, and the baking tins her mom used for sugar, brown sugar, and flour. Her mom used to make her oatmeal with everything here. Maybe she could make some? Looking around, Marceline couldn't see any way to reach to turn the knobs on the stove, and whined, feeling her stomach rumble. Reaching into the tub of oatmeal, she took a bite. Dumping the box of raisins, she ate a few, and smiled, taking another bite of the oatmeal from from the kind of tasted like the cookies she and her from the kind of tasted like the cookies she and her mom would make and send to Grandpa. After she'd eaten her fill, Marceline closed her eyes. The full belly was a welcome relief. Marceline woke with a start as she trembled. She'd fallen asleep in front of the fridge. Shivering, she pushed herself up from the cold floor. She was so tired. Yawning, Marcy walked from the kitchen. Slowly, she made her way down the dark, winding halls. She was exhausted now. Turning around another corner, Marceline blinked in surprise. The big door at the end of the hall was open. Pushing it wider, she walked inside. It was her parents' room. She was tired, so very tired. Climbing into the bed, Marcy closed her eyes. She could smell her mother on the sheets and her father on the pillows. Her eyes were so heavy. Closing them, Marceline fell asleep, waiting for her parents to come home. Ignitus lay in the bed, watching as Marceline slept. She hadn't made a peep in hours. Feeling his eyes grow heavy, he settled down next to her. Light from the morning sun slowly crept through the curtains. That was fine. Ignitus knew they had time to sleep in. The only thing going on today was their meeting with Lich, and that was later this evening. With a last look at Marcy, Ignitus allowed himself to close his eyes and fall asleep. Oh my gosh, that was so good. I kind of want to do one more, but it's getting pretty late, so I don't know. Maybe a little. We'll see. You know what? I'll see if I can come back. Otherwise, I'll just do more chapters tomorrow. Yep. Chapter 110, The Meeting. The room was tense. Fiona looked around from her seat. Mo and Ash were on the opposite side of she, Marshall, and Ignitus, and Lich, as usual, was at the head of the table. The meeting was not going the way she ever imagined it would, not in a million years. Fiona thought they had the tables flipped in their favor. She thought they'd at least be able to get out. She thought they'd be able to get out using the loophole Marceline had found them, but that was not the case. Marceline's loophole was legal and valid, and the lawyer confirmed this. Lich's astonishment when the loophole was presented to him was enough to give her hope. It was obvious that they'd caught him by surprise with this one, but the way he smiled after, Fiona knew that something was off, and that made her more than wary. She exchanged glances with Mo and could tell he too felt the same way. You're correct. You're all able to negate your contract quite easily, Lich said as he stood. Walking around the table, his secretary placed a folder in front of each of them. Finally, she placed one in Lich's waiting hand. That being said, you'll find that this will be far more difficult than you'd anticipated. If anyone were to be backing out of our contract, it should be me, he said, now opening the folder. I've spoken with my lawyer, and I am well within my legal rights to terminate our contract. Yet I will not be doing so. The contract blatantly states that any violated or unfulfilled terms and conditions have rather hefty rewards for myself. Should you choose to dissolve our contract, which you have zero legal ground in doing, I will become the owner to all music produced by your band and all rights. No judge would side with you considering the many contractual breaches you've made. What are you talking about? Marshall asked, staring him down. Taking your health concerns completely off of the table, Marshall. Do tell, what interviews have you done? What meet and greets have you participated in? Autograph signings? Panels attended? You fulfilled none of your media requirements. We've done everything you asked. On the contrary, Fiona, Lich said, once again smiling at her, you've all missed every event outside of concerts that I set up for you, that I set up for you. It seems as if you were more interested in publicity than showing in a mutually beneficial engagement, Lich said, now straightening his papers. You're full of it. You've never set us up for any other events. Ignitus, I assure you, I have. We booked, paid for, and cancelled every single one. Open your folders and see for yourselves, he said, motioning towards them. Now Fiona looked over at Marshall, then Ig. They both looked as unsure as Moko and Ash did, as unsure as she must certainly have looked. Lich had never set them up with anything other than concerts. Autographs and stuff like that usually took place after concerts or during the after parties Billy set up for them. Opening the folder, Fiona flipped through the pages, feeling a chill settle into her chest. It was full of invoices, cancellations, voided checks, and flyers promoting the events. Glancing across the table, she could see Ash and Mo sharing a look as they went through their photos. You say you informed us of these, but I've never gotten a single phone call, Mo said as he tabbed through his pile. Gentlemen, Lich said, looking around the table. Fiona, if you'll go to the final 8 pages, you'll see that for each of you there are multiple calls to you before each event and on the day of the event. This is impossible. There's no way every single one of us missed all these phone calls. Get transcriptions of your phone records, Mr. Flint. I did. Each of these indicates that you were all well informed, and yet still chose to ignore your legal obligations. Now Lich stood and began walking around the table. My lawyer has informed me that I am well within my right to sue you. He's also informed me that chances are highly likely that I'll win. If I sue you, I'm going to take every dime from you that I've spent on you with interest. The moment he looked into Fiona's eyes, she swore she could feel the nervousness building in her chest. The longer she held his gaze, the more anxious she felt. I'll take everything you love from you. Now he looked to Marshall. I'll take the rights to your music. Turning, he looked at Ignitus as he rounded the table. I'll take the rights to your lyrics, all of them. Now he paused by Ash. I will leave you with nothing but crippling debt. Now his gaze landed on Mo. You will lose everything faster than you can ever imagine. He stopped once again at the head of the table. Your contract expires in 3 years, yet I am willing to make a deal with you. Lich's eyes scanned the table. Lich's eyes scanned the table. They all exchanged glances, and under the table Marshall took Fiona's hand. What's your offer? Marshall asked, watching Lich smile. I will let you out in 2 years' time rather than 3. However, in return, you will spend the next 2 years on tour. Should you choose not to go with this deal, I'll have my lawyer begin our lawsuit against your band. How long do we have to decide? Marshall asked as went wide-eyed. But Marshall, the baby! You have until you leave this room. Turning, Lich walked through the door, closing it behind him. Marshall, we can't leave Ari for 2 years, Fiona said in a panicked voice. Then we take her with us, Fiona. You have everything like I do. Whether or not we were informed doesn't matter. Whether this is real or not, and I'm betting somehow it is, doesn't matter, Marshall said, shaking his head. He looked around the table. I hate saying this, but Lich is right. No judge in his right mind would ever side with us in court, especially when we have no actual solid evidence linking him to the stuff happening to us. We have nothing concrete. You're right, and if we go with Marcy's plan, we lose everything, Mo said, sharing a look with Ash. I would never take that risk with you guys on the line, Marshall said, shaking his head. The baby, Marsh. How will we keep her safe? Fiona asked, looking more than unsure. Do you think Marcy won't come with me, or that Kate won't go with Mo, girlie? Ignitus asked, watching as Fiona shook her head. That's not what I'm trying to say, she said softly. We know what you're trying to say, Fiona. Nothing's going to happen to my goddaughter while we're around, Mo said. Fiona looked around the table at the guys, each nodding resolutely at her, and with a final look to Marshall, she bowed her head. Okay. Does anyone have a does anyone have anything to say before we vote on this? Marshall asked, looking around the table. Ash, anything to say? You've been quiet all night long. Ash shook his head. To their surprise, Ignitus spoke up. I think you should do it. If we're getting screwed, someone might as well benefit, and it might as well be Ma. Take his offer, Ash. What are you talking about, Ig? Before he could respond to Marshall, Ash spoke up for the first time this evening. Let's offer to pay for my mom's health care, and I told him I'd get back to them on it. I felt like it was a trap. I thought we thought we were going to get out today. Had that been the case, I'd have said not to. But now, I agree with Ig. Take the deal, Ash. Wait. We thought we were going to get out today. Had that been the case, I'd have said not to. But now, I agree with Ig. Take the deal, Ash. Marshall said, Fiona nodding next to him. Ash now looked to Mo, who nodded as well. Take the deal. Ma needs the help, Mo said, watching as Ash nodded. Okay, I will. Are you all okay with us doing this? Marshall asked, all of them staring back. After a beat of silence, Ignitus spoke. I'm not okay with it, but it's an out. Moko and Ash nodded. Agreed. Same. So that's it then. We're on tour for the next 2 years, Marshall said, looking around the room. Right now his brain was going a mile a minute, and suddenly it was as if a light bulb went off in his head. Ash, I want you to leave first. Go right out and talk to the secretary now, Marshall said, earning Ash's curious look. Nodding, he did as he was told and pushed himself up from the table. Ash, he paused before he reached the door, turning back to Marshall. Nothing will happen to you, but your decision to take the help has pissed all of us off. We've we've all had a heated discussion over this, and we're all angry with you, he said, giving him a wink. Ash nodded in understanding and walked from the room. Flame Prince? Hmm? Ig looked over at Marshall with a grin. Are you angry? More like disappointed, but I can be. Good, I'm gonna need you to rage out. That's doable. Ig, I want you to storm out. Slam the door open and say something to Ash on the way out, like you're pissed about him taking the help. Keep everything mostly out of this. Capiche? He asked, watching as he nodded. Now he turned to Moko. Mo, I want you to hurry after Ig like you're still trying to keep the peace and bring him down to the parking lot. Let's meet at Marcy's. Arya's there anyways, and so is Kate. We can fill the girls in. Ash stays in the car, Ignitus said flatly. Marshall nodded, accepting this concession. Done. You're up. Ignitus nodded. Pounding his hands on the table, he pushed himself up, the chair scraping across the floor with a loud, jarring screech. Slamming over, slammed the door open. Storming over, he slammed the door open. You Judas bastard! Mo? Marshall didn't even need to speak. Moko was already on his feet and out the door. Ig, calm down. No, screw him. Come on, man, let's go. It's not worth it. Now Marshall stood, Fiona's hand still in his. Let's go and look upset with him, he said, keeping his voice low. Together they walked out of the meeting room. The sight in the hall was the spectacular he'd imagined it being. Mo was dragging a raging Ignitus down toward the stairs. Ash and the secretary looked more than startled as the pair passed by, Fiona death-glaring them. Yes, Mr. Graham, we'll take very good care of you. Come, we can sign the paperwork to authorize the payments upstairs in the office, she said, placing a hand on Ash's shoulder, walking him in the other direction. They rounded the corner, losing sight of him, but coming to a stop in front of Lich. Fiona hated him so much in this moment. He stared at him as if he'd owned them, and in all reality he did. Marshall, I take it you've made your decision, he drawled. Yes, we have, Marshall said, the words bitter in his mouth. Lich smiled at him as they continued to stare each other down. I want to hear you say it, Marshall. He was savoring this victory. Marshall knew this much. We'll take your deal and go on the tour, he bit out. Excellent. We'll get back to you shortly on the dates, he said, walking by without another word. Marshall began walking, Fiona falling in step with him as they made their way out of the building and into the parking lot. Mo and Ignitus were sitting by Marshall's car when they arrived. Convincing enough? Ig asked, watching as Marshall gave him a brief nod. You were perfect. What are you planning, Marsh? I want him to think he's dividing us, with all of us being mad at Ash. Chances are Lich will use that to his advantage. That'll benefit his mom some, I hope. As for the rest of the plan, it's in the works, but I'll let you know when I've got a solid idea. Fair enough, just keep us in the loop this time, dude, Mo said, now looking towards the building. Alf is coming. I'll bring him in my car. Did you drive? He asked, now looking at Ignitus. I'll bum a ride with them. We'll meet you at Marcy's. Kate couldn't stop. Kate couldn't help but stare at the view. Together they walked through the garden, trudging through the crunchy fall leaves. The silhouettes on the bare trees along the skyline was breathtaking. The garden was massive, and the paths were well lit, and the house, if it could even be called that, was on a grand scale the likes she'd never imagined. Yeah, my dad went overboard when he got this place. I'll bet he never imagined it would be all of us living together like this, though, Mufsleen said softly, understanding Kate's reaction. She adjusted Ollie on her hip as they continued down the path. How do you think the meeting is going? Kate asked, now stopping to look at the koi swimming lazily in the pond. I'm hoping it worked. Everything should have gone off without a hitch. But Lich, he's got a way of seeping into things, Marceline said, shaking her head. Ollie began whining. Marcy bounced her, hoping to soothe her. What's wrong? You missing Mommy and Daddy? Mama. Mama? Marcy asked, sounding it out. Dada! Dude, did you know she could do that? She asked quickly, looking at Kate, who stood there with the biggest smile. No, I did not. Oh my gosh. Their gushing halted as the henchman, like Butler, appeared. He had informed them that everyone had returned. Smiling, Kate looked to Marcy. Are you ready to celebrate? Kate asked as Marceline smiled. Absolutely. Let's go find our victorious men and welcome them home from battle, she said with a grin. The butler spoke again before they could head inside. They're waiting in the driveway, ma'am. I'm told to inform you also, he said before they could move. There was an individual here with them who is not allowed onto the premises per your husband's orders, he asked as Marceline felt that chill in her chest. I wonder if this feeling will almost stop. Yes, thank you. Together they walked, and when they arrived, Kate ran over, throwing her arms around Moko. The moment she spotted Ignitus, Marceline felt an ebb of concern. He didn't look happy. None of them looked happy. This wasn't good. Fiona was quick to take Ollie, holding her tightly in her arms. She didn't look okay herself. This couldn't be good. Turning, Marcy bumped right into Ignitus. What happened? We got screwed. Beyond all reason screwed, he said, shaking his head, looking away from her. What? But everything was legally sound. I researched into it for weeks. I know you did, and baby, your work was rock solid, but Lich set us up. But how? You guys followed that contract to the letter. I would know. I scrutinized the thing for weeks, Marceline said, sounding more than confused. What on earth had Lich done that slammed their escape hatch closed so quickly? Marshall crossed his arms, shaking his head. He gave us a deal, Marshall said, raising his voice so Kate could hear as well. We either go on tour with him for the next 2 years, or he absolutely obliterates us in court. Apparently, we had multiple media-related things he'd set up for us that weren't attended. I still say he's full of crap, Ignatius said, handing her the folder. Marceline tabbed through everything, skimming along the pages. This absolutely would void our loop. This absolutely would void our loophole. Not if you knew about any of these? She asked, looking around at them. Fiona looked up at her, shaking her head. You know, if we had, we wouldn't have blown it off like that, Marcy, she said softly. I know. So what's the plan? Kate asked, looking around the group. We don't have a choice. We have to go on tour for the next 2 years, Mo said, looking nervous. This had caught Kate's attention. Placing her hand on his arm, she nodded towards his car away from everyone else. Once they were there, Kate paused, taking his hand. You okay, Shug? I want to ask if you've been willing to come with me on tour, Mo said quickly, rubbing the back of his head. Of course I would. I know it's sudden, and I know that we haven't been together very long. Modestus, and I know it's a lot to ask. Shug, I just. Grabbing the collar of his shirt, Kate brought her lips to his, silencing him. You talk too much. Of course I'm going to come with you. Did you truly think I was going to leave you by yourself? Who would feed you? She asked in the most serious voice, and unable to help it, Moko laughed. You really mean that? He asked, wanting to be sure. Of course I do, Kate said warmly. Taking his hands in hers, she squeezed them. I'd never be able to sit here without you for that long. Of course I'll come with you. I'll cover the cost for everything, he said, watching as Kate shook her head. You don't have to do that. I'm sure I could. I don't care what you could do. You're willing to uproot your life for me for 2 years. I'm covering it. Smiling, Kate wrapped her arms around her boyfriend. I love how stubborn you are. Yeah, now, he said, scoffing, making her laugh. Thank you. You know I'll always be there for you, Kate said, kissing him again as they leaned against the car. Not to butt in, but I really don't want to be the third wheel here, Ash said from inside the car, making Kate jump. Sorry, she said softly. Then she blinked in realization that Ash was in Mo's car and smiled. She wasn't sure quite how far this was going to go between them, but it seemed that things had settled some. Hey, before you drop me at my place, can Hey, before you drop me at my place, can we stop so I can get a new phone? Yeah, dude, it's no problem. Do you want to come? Mo asked while Kate looked at him skeptically. Is that even a question? She asked with a smirk. I'll let everyone know that we're leaving. Kate had come and said her goodbyes, and as they watched them drive off, Marceline sighed. I really can't believe this happened. I told you we were set up. I know, and I believe you, of course. I can't believe they've gone this far. It's a bunch of crap, she said, watching as a car pulled into the driveway. And speaking of a bunch of crap, she grumbled as her father stepped from the car. The second he spotted them, he walked over. Marceline, sweetheart, can I? No. Turning on her heel, Marcy left them alone with her father. She stomped up the stairs and into the house, slamming the door behind her. Well, I hate to say the night's over, but I want this damn day to be over, so yeah. Ignitus said, trailing off, looking back in the direction Marceline stormed off to. That's okay, we're heading out anyways, Marshall said, taking Ollie, who reached for him. Let's go out for dinner. Hearing this, Fiona smiled. Really? No ordering in? She asked excitedly. Now let's let someone else handle the dishes, he said with a grin. Besides, I want to watch you go ham on a Sunday, no lie. You say that now, Hudson said with a smile. Have a good night, he said, standing with Ignitus, watching as Marshall and Fiona got into the car driving off. So they're on their way to dinner. I take it your meeting with Litch went well? Hudson asked, watching as Ignitus briefly met his gaze. Looking away, he shook his head. It astronomically bombed, actually. He trapped us and we have 2 more years with him. I'm sorry, I truly am. We all are, he said softly, turning towards the stairs. I'll talk to Marcy and see if I can't get her to calm down some with you. Hudson nodded as together they made their way up the steps and into the house. Ignitus had a feeling that he wasn't going to get much sleep tonight. I'm not so much as talking to him until he gives me my jaw back, Marceline said crossly, pacing around their room. Ignitus sat on the edge of the bed watching her. Marcy, he's your dad. I don't care. That was my career, Iggy, and I was good at it. This conversation wasn't going the way FP had imagined it going at all. He hadn't expected rainbows and butterflies, but he expected to at least be able to talk to Marcy. He'd always been able to talk to her when she was upset. That hope, though, had crashed and burned the moment the words came from his mouth. He was right. You are more important than any career, Marcy. He made the right choice. The look on her face changed immediately as she stared at him. Ignitus felt his breath catch. This wasn't something that had happened before. It was like a wall that had completely come up. She turned abruptly, her long hair whipping behind her as she swung from the room. She slammed the door behind her, making him wince. Damn it, I really messed up. So, you're going to tell me what happened that you're talking again? Kate asked as they sat outside the mall waiting for Ash to come out. Well, yesterday was bothering me a lot. To be honest, I didn't tell you everything that happened yesterday either. I know Ignitus was furious about something. I've never seen him that mad. He had every right to be. In his position, I wouldn't have hesitated to do what Ig did, he said, shaking his head. If I asked what happened, would you tell me? Mo glanced toward the mall entrance for a moment before looking back at her. Back when Ash and Marcy were dating, along with everything else, he tried spicing things up in the bedroom with the camera. Oh my God, he did not, Kate said in a hushed voice. He did, and he didn't tell her about it until almost halfway through. Whoever took his phone was the one who shared that video. That's why Egg was so angry. That's terrible. I'd be an absolute mess if that were me. No wonder Marcy seemed so scattered today. Yeah, honestly, I'd be the same way. But back to Ash. So I got the email and I watched that. Wait, you watched it? Watched it? She asked, sounding upset. Kate, I swear I wasn't just watching to watch. You know those things that you see and you feel like something horrible is gonna happen? Like you're freaking out the whole time, but you can't look away. He asked, watching as Kate frowned with a nod. It was that bad? The way he grabbed her. Kate, if he grabbed her like that, knowing he was on video, what did he do to her when nothing was recording him? He asked, looking away from her, back towards the mall. After a moment, he looked back again. Last night was it for me. I had to talk to him about it, especially after that talk with Marsh. I let a lot of things slide, and I made excuses for him because he was my best friend. Those excuses I made led to our friend getting hurt. Chug, Kate murmured, placing her hand on his arm. I know it's not my responsibility to keep Ash in check, but it is my responsibility to say something if I see it. I said nothing. I asked no questions and Marcy got hurt. That's something I'll never be able to fix, and I can't take it back. They sat there in silence for a moment. Kate looked out her window towards the mall. She saw a few people walk out, leaving the entrance clear. But yeah, Mo said, continuing on, I saw that and I knew Ig would flip. I wanted to. I know I didn't even feel a fraction of how he did, but when I went and talked to Ash after, he was genuine. I really think he's remorseful. He said he wants to focus on himself, he said with a shrug. My thing is, he wasn't always this way. That and he seems to regret his actions. It's going to take a lot of work, but if he's willing to put in the effort to work on himself and get better, I'm willing to stick around and help him make that change. Honestly, that's fair. Besides, you've known him for years. Since junior high. I've known him for 10 years now. That's a long time to just throw away. See, though, that's the thing. I don't want or need that bullshit in my life. I wouldn't be the one throwing anything away. Ash would. He'd be throwing away all of his friends and possibly his career. He knows one more mess up like this, and I'm gone. He knows because I told him as much. Spotting Ash, he started the car, pulling up to the conversation. Pulling up to the conversation was over now that Ash was in the car. Dude, this is the best birthday ever. My mom's good. Her healthcare and prescriptions are going to be covered for a good long while. You were talking to me again, and I got a free phone upgrade because I've been with them for so long. Today's been so good outside of the band stuff, Ash said happily as he sat in the back of the car. Same number? Yeah, same one. They were even able to pull my contacts from my account too, and they shut off the old one. I'm glad that this whole phone situation's all over and done with. Kate sat there listening to the silence of the car. Modestus, she knew, would either stick to his word or stay quiet like he had been. She waited, Mo hesitating. Finally, unable to stand the silence, Kate reached over. Kate reached for the radio, pausing as he spoke. Ash, just because it's over for you doesn't mean it is for everyone else. Ig and Marcy still have to deal with whatever fallout comes from this. Again, they all sat there in silence. Looking into the rearview mirror, Mo watched Ash nod solemnly before their eyes met. You're right. Marceline was furious. Was there a word about furious? Enraged was too much, but so was this whole damn situation. All of it was just too much. Everyone on Earth might as well have seen that video because everyone in her social sphere had. Suddenly the thought came to her, and grabbing her purse, Marceline walked to a car. It was a short walk and a faster drive. Pulling out the keys to her best friend's place, Marceline unlocked the door and walked in. Bonnie was on the couch reading a book. Her hair was a typical pastel pink and pulled back in a loose bun. Walking over, Marcy crawled on the couch, laying her head in her friend's lap. Peebee said nothing. She just raised her book so she could continue on reading. They stayed like that until Bonnie snapped her book shut, placing it on the side table. Instead of moving, she rested her head on her hand, her free hand going through Marcy's hair. I haven't seen you in a while. I know, I've been dealing with a lot, Marcy said quiet. Marcy said quietly. She felt like the worst friend on earth, yet she was running here, expected to be cared for just like she was. Almost a year's worth of a lot. I'm sorry. I'm not. We were both living our lives. There's nothing wrong with that, she said, placing her reading glasses on the table. I'm sorry I don't see you more. Marcy, you seem to be sorry a lot. What's on your mind? She asked gently. Everything? It's been a long time. Let's get caught up. Would you like some tea? Do you have that green tea, pomegranate apple flavor? Marcy asked hopefully. You mean the one I make just for you? Yeah, with loads of sugar. I'm sure I could whip some up, Bonnie said with a smile, pushing herself to her feet. I'll get the kettle going and you start talking, she said, making her way to the kitchen. The last time we spoke you were dating Ash. Is that still a thing? She asked as she bustled around the kitchen. No, it's not a thing, not anymore. No? What happened? Tell me everything, she said, handing her the steaming mug of tea, placing her own next to a book. It's a lot, it's a lot, Marcy said softly, laying her head back in Bonnie's lap. Well, start at the beginning, she said, still running her fingers through her hair. Ash's mom, something's wrong with her. She was fine when we first started talking. After she started getting sick, our relationship got a million times worse. Ash was a bit possessive at the start, and I can get that. But the longer everything went on and the worse she got, he just got so much worse too. He didn't trust me not to cheat on him while he was taking care of her. He constantly deleted my messages from Finn and Iggy too. Then he started hitting things. He punched a hole in the wall of my dad's studio. The whole way home, he chewed me out because I was talking to Iggy at the studio. Mind you, Iggy and I were having a fight Ash caused. Then when we got home, he starts apologizing and expected makeup sex. I didn't want to, and he just kept guilting me about how he just wanted to feel good about something going on in his life. He just kept badgering me about it until I finally got mad. Marcy shake her head. No, it was after. Honestly, the way he'd been treating me, I actually did leave him for half a second. What changed that? I thought I was pregnant, she said, sounding ashamed. When I left, I planned on going to Marshall's and Fiona's. That didn't happen? No, Marcy did, shaking her head. Did he stop you from going? She asked, sounding concerned. No, Icky came. He ran to our place from Marshall's house because he felt like something was wrong, and he wanted to see that I was okay, she said, wiping her eyes. He seems to really care about you. He does. I went there knowing all too well how he felt about me. The whole time at Eggs, all I wanted was for him to touch me, to hold me. He always makes me feel safe. I ended up cheating with Ash on him. We didn't sleep together, but we might as well have. I just, I didn't want there to be any possibility where I was having a baby, and Iggy thought it was his, and it wasn't. Oh, Marcy, you didn't tell either of them you thought you were pregnant? No, you're the only person I've ever told. I was terrified. I was terrified that I'd be stuck with Ash forever if I was, and terrified that Iggy would want absolutely nothing to do with me because of it. So for the baby I thought we were having, I agreed to go to therapy with him. I'm hoping that at least went well, but it didn't, did it? Horribly. When I explained everything to Grandpa, he was so upset. He said anyone legally trained would know not to have us work things out the way she was having us do things. We separated, and I stayed in our office. I turned it into a second bedroom. Things were okay for a little bit, but our therapist put a stop to that. He got worse, and I pulled away more. We had a lot of ups and downs. Did you ever find out? Yeah, I got my monthly after I went to Dad's. I went home after another argument. At that point, I was more than a month late, and you know I went like clockwork. My doctor said it could have been stress related, but I don't know. So I got it, and I was laid out for like 2 straight days. Then a few days after, it called because he almost got killed in an accident. Is he okay? That sounds terrifying. He is, and it was. That same day I broke up with Ash, but we still had the rest of the lease to wait. Eventually I went back to the apartment. We had a million petty arguments over everything. It always came back to Iggy. Always, and all he wanted was to keep me safe. Ash and I ended up getting into it because Egg hugged me at the grocery store, and Ash could smell him on me, even after it was established that we were broken up. I can't imagine with how possessive he was that went well either, she said, taking a sip of her tea. Now Moseley turned, looking her friend in the eye for the first time. He slapped me. Hebe began coughing as she choked on her tea. What? Absolutely not. I'll kill him, she snapped. That's basically what Egg said, Marcy said with a smile. I have access to hydrofluoric acid, if you ever need it, just saying. What would I do with that, Bonnabelle? Hide the body, obviously, she said with a dark smile. I forgot how twisted you are under all those pastel colors, Marceline said with a grin, reaching up to poke Bonnie's cheek. You love it. Always, Peebs, duh. Bonnie sighed now, Marcy watching her. You know I hate bursting your bubble, Marceline, but then what happened? I left him. I left him that same night completely. We hadn't had sex in weeks. I knew I wasn't pregnant, and I couldn't do it, Bonnie. I couldn't be the woman who lets her man hit her. He'd already crossed so many lines with no regard for me. I needed to go. Iggy gave me his address at the grocery store. I went to his place. Have things gotten better at least? You could say that. We got engaged that night, Iggy and I, and we married the next day at City Hall. We didn't tell anyone. Well, he told my dad and grandpa. I'm happy for you. Is this relationship better? By a million times. I've never had a man love me the way he does, Marcy said, smiling, though that smile faltered. Are you having troubles with him? Not troubles with him, but with my dad. And kind of Iggy, too, I guess. Well, tell me what's happening now with that. Flash happened with that. Early in our relationship, he set up a camera in our room to try and spice things up, and he didn't tell me until almost all of my clothes were off. Well, his phone got stolen, and even though I deleted the video, someone found it and sent it to my job. And your dad let you go? Yes, it's bullshit. I do agree, Marcy. It's entirely unfair, Bonnie said as Marceline sighed. He said he agrees with my dad. Well, let me ask you something. Did you say he agreed, or do you think he agrees completely, or but you're just afraid to confront him and find out? Marceline lay silently and Bonnie smiled. Why don't you ask your husband what he means, rather than rushing to judgment and assuming things? I know it can be scary, but if you go off of rush judgment, you'll always find that you're missing some of the facts. What are you so afraid of? I don't want to be alone again. Oh, honey, you of all people should know that how you're feeling right now is because of what happened to you as a little girl. I know, but I can't help it. It was so easy to talk to him when we weren't a thing, Marcy said, looking away. It's because of your perspective. You're afraid to lose him now that he's yours. It was easier when you weren't together because if you went off and did whatever, it wouldn't leave you feeling vulnerable. But it's okay to be vulnerable, Marcy, especially with the person you're choosing to spend the rest of your life with. You're the best, Bonnie. Damn right I am. Marshall smiled, watching Ollie eat the hot fudge and whipped cream from the sundae. He wanted to watch her make a mess. He wanted to watch her throw food as she giggled. He got what he wanted. She'd reminded him of a sparrow opening her mouth for each bite of the delicious treat. He wanted some source of happiness to come from today. He didn't want today to just be the day Liz trapped them. It could also be the day Ollie was too cute for her own good, or the day he and Fiona had a movie marathon. This didn't have to be the be all end of the world. the be all end of the world. Dinner was a blast, and once home, Fiona had brought the baby in for a bath. She'd splashed merrily in the tub, making all sorts of bubbles and all sorts of a mess. He and Fiona laughed watching their daughter in the tub. When he was sick, nights like these were the ones he'd feared missing out on the most. He watched as Fiona laughed, making silly voices with the bath toys. Then she looked up at him and smiled. He couldn't help his grin in return. This night didn't have to be miserable. Lich's actions didn't have to ruin his day. With that thought, Marshall focused on his family. Once Ari was bathed and in her pajamas, Marshall and Fiona gathered into the living room, Ari in his arms. Dada, come on, say mama. I've been your personal milk machine for nearly a year. The least you can do is call me mommy, Fiona said with a pout as Marshall laughed. She's a daddy's girl. There's nothing wrong with that. Mama. Now she reached for Fiona, who smiled, taking her into her arms and covering her in kisses. Do you really think we'll be able to take her with us on tour, Marshall? I do. I went on tour with my dad when they toured the States. I see no reason we can't bring Ari, he said, feeling his phone buzz in his pocket. Pulling it out, he read the text message and frowned. What's up? Meg's asking if we've seen Marcy. Apparently she stormed out and he hasn't seen her for a bit, Marshall said, responding back and tossing the phone onto the table. Ari crawled from Fiona into Marshall's lap, reaching for Cake behind him. Cake jumped out, playfully batting at Ari's hand, making her screech in delight. Can you say Cake? Fiona asked, smiling. Cake the kitty? Ollie continued to babble, going back and forth between them, chasing Cake as they sat on the floor, she playfully darting around them. Leaning back, Marshall relaxed as he watched his little family. Cake walked up, bumping his hand with her hand as she purred. With her head as she purred, Ollie was quick to follow her, crawling closely behind her towards Marshall. The moment she arrived, climbing into his arms, she bit him and began chewing. Marshall couldn't help but laugh. I always knew I was delicious. He checked the clock. It was close to Ollie's bedtime, but with how wired she was, he didn't think she'd be falling asleep any time soon. Marshall, I wanted to ask, why did you want everyone flipping on Ash at Nightosphere? Fiona asked, watching Marshall smile. Think about it, Fee. Lich doesn't know we had Marcy's out. He offered that to Ash as a way to keep us locked here. If he thinks we're being trapped here by Ash, and thinks we're mad at Ash, he's more likely to keep paying for his mom fueling our anger. That's really smart. I'm trying to think a few steps ahead, Marshall said, now glancing towards the window, making a face. Now he looked down, busying himself with Ollie. Fiona, I'm gonna give you the baby. I want you to act like you're putting her to bed and go upstairs, Marshall said in a low voice as he stood. Fiona followed his instructions wordlessly, taking Ollie as Marshall handed her over. Fiona climbed the stairs and went into their bedroom, waiting by the door. Marshall returned about 10 minutes later. Is everything okay? I thought someone was near the window, but when I checked, I didn't see anything. I'll check tomorrow when I can see better. Again he took Ollie, who reached for him, though now she rubbed her face against his shoulder, whining. "You're starting to crash, Mamas?" He listened to her whining continue as he began patting her back. "I'm going to put her to bed." Marshall turned, but pausing, feeling Fiona's hand resting gently on the back of his neck. He looked back towards her, closing his eyes as Fiona's lips brushed against his. "Hurry back, I'll be waiting for you," she said, watching him smoke. "I'll do my best not to keep you waiting too long." Walking to Ollie's room, Marshall began singing to her softly, rocking her in his arms. Laying her in the crib, Marshall listened as Ollie fussed before settling down. He stood there listening to the silence. Turning, he hurried back to the bedroom. FP lay in the bed in the dark room, listening to the silence. He wasn't asleep, he was waiting for Marcy to come home. He wasn't quite sure how to handle this. This seemed so unlike Marceline. The door opened, and looking up, he spotted her dropping her purse on the table. He didn't know if he should say something or stay quiet and let everything go. The next time this happens, can you at least send me a text so I know you're okay? He asked into the darkness of the room, making Marcy pause. Can I ask you what you meant? I meant the next time you're pissed and take off, text me something so I know you weren't dead. Or at least respond to my text with a flip off emoji or something. I just want to know you're safe. Okay, next time I will. But that wasn't what I meant, she said, watching him make a face. What did you mean then? Slowly he pushed himself upright to look at her. Earlier, what did you mean when you said you agreed with my dad? They sat there silently for a moment. Finally, Ignitus moved to the end of the bed, Marceline stepping towards him just out of his reach. Hudson told me last night that there are over 2,000 people that work in Nightosphere. He asked me these questions, and now I'll ask you. Would you really feel safe going back? Would you feel comfortable knowing you'd be making presentations to people who'd seen you like that? Do I want you to take the risk that some piece of crap will use this video as an excuse to try to do something to you? He said, now reaching for her hand, squeezing it tightly. My answers were no, I don't think you would. No, you definitely wouldn't. And hell no. Those are all extremely valid points your dad gave me last night that I myself hadn't even considered. I agree with you that this whole thing is bullshit. How it went down was worse. I also agree that how it's been handled isn't ideal. Now he took her other hand, bringing her a few steps closer. That being said, I never said I agreed with your father. I said he made the right choice. It's the right choice for the situation. That doesn't mean I agree with or like what he did or how he chose to do it, he said, first kissing one hand, then the other, pulling her close. Placing her hands on his shoulders, he wrapped his arms around her waist. Marcy, you are always going to be my main priority. I know a lot is going on, and I know this all has to be incredibly stressful for you. But I'm right here, baby. I'm right here. I just need you to talk to me. This won't work if we don't talk to each other. Tell me what's going on in your head, he said, gently looking up at her. Ignitus wasn't sure what was going on in her head, but he knew she had to be overwhelmed. Marcy climbed into the bed, sitting on his lap. Burying her face in his neck, she took a breath, feeling as he held her tighter. It's all too much. Everything going on is just too much. I feel like you're gonna look around and see that all I bring is problems and leave. I'm so scared you're going to leave, and I'll let you on tour for 2 years, he said, squeezing him tighter, feeling as he did the same. Marcy, I'm never going to leave. I know, but I can't help but feel like this, she whispered. Is there anything I can do to help? His voice was so soft and gentle. She knew she wanted to tell him. Bonnie was right. She shouldn't be afraid to be vulnerable with him. It was just scary. She woke this morning with her throat scratchy and raw. She had to have woken him last night, but if she had, he hadn't said anything, though him waking at almost 1 in the afternoon told a different story of his evening. When I was a little girl, right after my mom died, I was a mess. All I wanted was my mom. I remember my dad holding me while I was having a mess of a tantrum. I was completely out of control and just screaming for my mother. He put me down on the bed and left. I fell asleep crying. I woke up and went looking for him, but he was gone. Iggy, my dad was gone. He left me alone for months until Grandpa came. I've carried that with me my entire life. I'm so scared it's just going to happen with you too. I'm so scared you're just going to leave and not come back, she said, squeezing him, fearing that somehow he'd vanished from her arms. And I know you never do that to me, but I'm scared anyways. I'm always scared. Again he squeezed her tighter, though now he loosened his hold. Marcy, I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'll always be here. If that's what you need me to do, I'll do it. You know I'll do anything for you. I know, and I wanted to ask you if you would come with me when I talk to my dad, Marcy said, wiping her eyes. Of course I will. Good, he's in his office now, I think, she said as he pulled back to look at her. Wait, now? But it's so late. I know, but I want to talk to him about me closing out my accounts with my clients. Do you think that's something he'd let you do? Maybe, but I think with me, he might. Well, whatever it is you're planning, I'm here. I know you are. Slowly, she released him, climbing to her feet. Standing there, she waited, watching as Ignitus stood. All right, let's go talk to Dad. Marceline led the way to his office, FP trailing behind. She knocked on the open door, entering. Her father looked up at them, closing his laptop. I want to talk to you about work. My evening is going well, thank you for asking, Marcy, Hudson said flatly, watching his daughter flush in embarrassment. Now she took a breath and sighed. I'm sorry, I wanted to talk to you, as you know, about work. I gathered. Are you going to take a seat or stay standing? I'll stand. I will agree to step aside at work for however long you want, but I have conditions. Tell me what they are and I'll consider them. I want to go into the office and swap over my accounts. I want to explain to my clients that my position has changed and I will no longer be working at the company. Marceline, while I admire your tenacity, I want you to be safe, Hudson said, folding his hands with a sigh. That's why I want Iggy to come with me. This had caught both of them by surprise. What? Huh? You're worried about my safety and the professionalism of the company. I'm worried about my career. Let me go in and close out things on my end. Everything I'm connected to. That will look good for the company. It will explain to my clients why their manager has changed. And with Iggy there with me, you have to know nothing will happen. Hudson looked from Marceline to Ignitus, who seemed to be just as surprised as she was. I will give you 1 day. 1 day, if Ignitus agrees to stay with you in your office. I will set up the appointments with all of your clients. You will remain in your office the whole time, and when there are no clients, your door is to remain locked. You will meet with no other staff nor speak to them. You are to be escorted through the building at all times, and yes, that does include the ladies' room. I'll at least need to speak to to the individuals taking over from me, Dad. No, you don't. After you explain to them why you no longer are their manager, they will be escorted directly to my office where they will meet their new manager. Once they have signed the paperwork, your role ends. I'll accept that. What are you going to tell them? Due to unexpected circumstances, I'm taking employment elsewhere and will be transferring management of their cases elsewhere. Sign the forms, transfer management, thank them, and push them right out the door. Done. Ig watched as they stared each other down, and finally Hudson nodded. I accept this agreement. I'll try and have the meeting this week, if not Monday the latest, he said, now looking at Ig. Does that work for you as well? It was like speaking with a brick wall. For the first time in ages, Ignitus couldn't read his father-in-law and wasn't sure what to make of it. This works perfectly for me. I won't leave her side, he said firmly. He wasn't sure if this was a test or not, but as Hudson nodded, looking back towards his daughter, Ignitus couldn't help but feel as if he'd passed something of great importance. Great importance. The two finished up what felt like a very strange business meeting, even going as far as shaking hands. Hudson, though, refused to let her leave without a hug. After several awkward moments, Marcy reached up, hugging him back. I just want to keep you safe, sweetheart. I know, and I get it. I don't like it or agree with it, but I understand why it has to happen, Marceline said, releasing him. I'll get these meetings set up as soon as I can. Ignitus, black button down and slacks. If you have none, black jeans with no toes in them. Will do, he said quickly, Marceline leading the way from the office. Night, Daddy. Good night, Marcy, Ignitus. With a nod, Ig followed Marceline back to their room. The moment the door shut behind him, Marceline jumped on him, laughing. Oh my God, I made a bet on a deal with my dad and it worked, she said, laughing as Iggy spun her. I won't pretend to know what you got from this, but I know it's what you both wanted, so I'm down for it, he said, plopping her onto the bed. This way I get to end things on my terms, just like you said. We all get what we want, she said with a smile. You really don't mind coming to work with me? What else would I be doing otherwise? It's no biggie to me as long as you're happy, Marcy, he said, flopping next to her, opening his arms as Marceline snuggled close. I am. I'm very happy, thank you, Iggy. For you, anything. Alright. Just because he made the right choice in firing her to keep her safe doesn't give her the right to yell at her like that. Like, you didn't have to yell so much. He could have just said, he could have just made it a big deal. He could have just fired her without, like, yelling at her like that. And I was so worried that, like, when they wanted to take the baby on tour, that, and take their partners on tour, like Mo wants to take Kate on tour, that, um, that he would be that the Lich would have been like that Lich would have been like, "Oh, well, we only have enough room for a certain amount of people, so you're gonna have to pick and choose who can come," or like, "We don't have enough room for anyone extra, so you can't bring your baby and stuff." That still might happen, which I'm nervous about, but we're gonna see.